Chapter 900. Zhang Yan exited Xianyu Palace, called Zhang Chan and flew out from the underground. Once he reached the surface, the two flood dragons immediately welcomed him and reported, "Jinren, just now when the demonic aura dissipated, the surrounding waves gathered and seemed to want to engulf the continent, but the two of us blocked it." Zhang Yan looked around and saw the raging waves. He knew that the gushing spring continent's terrain was low, and it relied on the demon toad's original demonic aura for protection. Now that the body was destroyed, there was naturally no way to block it. However, the demon toad was not being kind, he was just afraid that his forbidden land would become a swamp country, and there would be no living creatures for him to use, and it would be hard for him to escape. If it was another land, he would have eaten all the people and beasts in the continent to nourish himself. He praised the two brothers and said, "Well done, although the demon's body has been destroyed by me, I suspect that its spirit has escaped. If it is not eradicated, it will leave a source of trouble. I want to set up a forbidden formation here, one to protect the continent, and two to guard against this demon. One of you two brothers, go and bring the people in the continent back, and the other one will stay here to suppress the waves, so that it will be convenient for me to do things." The two flood dragons said in unison, "Yes, Master." Zhang Chan was eager to try. "Master, why don't you come down, do you want me to find that old demon?" Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said slowly, "There's no hurry, judging from the spiritual vigor here, this demon can't run far. It won't be too late to catch it after I make the appropriate arrangements." Zhang Chan quickly said, "I will protect you, Master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and Zhang Chan bowed and gathered his strength to guard the surroundings. Zhang Yan observed the terrain of the gushing spring continent for a while, and thought to himself, the spiritual spirit here is not prosperous. If I use a normal method to set up the formation, it will be able to withstand the wind and waves, but after tens or hundreds of years, the formation mechanism will probably dissipate under the erosion, and the people in the continent will still suffer a disaster. In fact, it was the simplest to use his previous method of moving the mountains and changing the land. However, in this way, it would ruin the fields and pastures, making it difficult to farm and graze. This went against the original intention. Apart from that, there was another way, which was after setting up the formation. Then, he used a magical treasure to suppress it. This would affect the land's spirit and protect the formation. However, there were also drawbacks. A spiritual treasure would not be willing to sit here and be trapped. Perhaps it was under Zhang Yan's orders. He did not dare to disobey. But as time went on, they would think of a way to escape, and ordinary magical treasures would not be of much use here. He pondered deeply for a long time. Finally he said, "Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Why don't I pass down a martial art here? Even if they are limited by spiritual opportunity and can't achieve much, they can still return to the prohibition array in the continent guarding formation." Having made up his mind, he lightly flicked his finger, and array flags flew out one after another, transforming into spiritual light that shot straight into the sky. Then, they hung there motionlessly as if they were embedded in the sky. He blew gently, and in an instant, a gust of strong wind flew up like a dragon. With the help of his mana, the array flags shone brightly. Countless talisman Xian characters appeared on the flags, floating and spinning in the sky. They attracted the essence and spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth, and kept gathering inside. After 7 days and nights, Zhang Yan saw that the fire was ready. He pointed again, and thousands of array flags shook at the same time. They fell one after another, arranged according to the position of the array. Some went into the sea, some went deep into the continent, and they spread out, covering tens of thousands of miles in an instant. Seeing that everything was arranged properly, he made a final hand seal, and the entire continent shook slightly. It was as if a layer of mist had been removed, and the mountains and rivers in this place suddenly became a little more spiritual. From this moment onwards, all the spiritual opportunity of the mountains and rivers under the surface of the earth had merged with the prohibition array, and there was no distinction between them. Once the big array was formed, the effect was immediate. The waves that were piling up outside gradually retreated. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, leaped into the sky, and said, "All of you, come over." The two flood dragons and Zhang Chan heard the call, and hurriedly went forward. Zhang Yan explained in detail what he needed to do, and after the three listened, they went according to his orders. Zhang Yan raised his head, and the next thing was to deal with the golden talisman. This required him to go beyond the extreme heaven to collect the heavenly yang fire qi to refine it into the true red sun fire. This was easy to do elsewhere, but in this west continent, he had to be wary of the golden moon worm. He only needed to adjust his breathing for a moment, and with a soft shout, a conveyance light rose from the ground and rushed into the sky. After a long time, with a rumble, he had already crashed through the high cloud and reached above the extreme heaven. His mana was surging, and the moment he appeared beyond the high heavens, it was like a fire in the night, and instantly attracted a ball of golden cloud that stretched for tens of thousands of miles towards him. If an ordinary cultivator saw such a scene, he would not dare to stay for long. However, there was no fear on his face. He calmly circulated the magical power of the divine contract and released balls of dark clouds and black smoke from all over his body, shielding his body within. Although this technique could not advance to a higher level, the method of absorbing essence was a wonderful technique in the world, and he had no intention of giving it up. Moreover, the foundation was already laid. Unless he started from scratch, it would not be easy to change it. Even if he deduced some kind of supernatural power in the future, he could only use this as a foundation to seek changes, and could not deviate too much. After spreading out the mana, he no longer looked at the sea of worms, and sat cross-legged on the clouds. He took out a silver mirror, and placed it above his head. He circulated his mana and urged it to absorb the yang qi of the scorching sun. After half a day, he retracted his mana. Looking around, the black cloud that was protecting him was not much left under the continuous erosion of the golden moon worms, and he had no intention to compete with them. There were countless of these worms, and they were almost endless. At night, when the moonlight shone on them, they were even more powerful. He kept the silver mirror, and turned into a ray of sword light to escape from the cloud. As soon as the high cloud was broken, the golden moon worms followed behind him, but most of them were blocked by the black smoke that he left behind. Even if a few of them escaped, they were not a threat, and there was no need to pay much attention to them. When he reached the bottom, he randomly found an island to land on, and used his qi to recover his mana. On the second day, he once again went up to the extreme heaven, and it was also dusk when he came down. At this moment, the silver mirror in his hand was extremely hot, and the color of the mirror had already turned red. He calculated a little, and felt that it was enough, so he did not hesitate anymore. He immediately sat down and sacrificed to refine the true red sun fire. This technique was not complicated, and with his cultivation, he only needed a night's work to cultivate it. At dawn, he opened his palm, and within his palm, there was a ball of bright light the size of a wine cup. There was a ball of bright light the size of a wine cup suspended in the air. From time to time, it would emit flowing scarlet flames. However, it looked restless and extremely aggressive. It was as if it would explode if it relaxed even a little. He used his mana to slightly suppress the fire element, and then took out the golden talisman. The fire was controlled by him, and immediately pounced on it, wrapping it within. The spirit of the demonic cicada instantly felt that something was wrong. It kept begging for mercy. Zhang Yan just ignored it, and after a moment, he had refined more than half of the golden talisman. The spirit inside was already on the verge of collapse from the burning of the true fire, and now that it saw that it could no longer hide, it rushed out without caring about anything else. It was thinking of escaping. Zhang Yan smiled, "How can I let you escape?" He moved his spirit. The shadow of a jade scroll appeared between his eyebrows. It released a ray of divine light, and the spirit was sucked up, and then there was a clear sound. It returned to his consciousness. Zhang Yan slowly retracted his transcendence energy and stood up. He asked a Jiao dragon who had been waiting outside, "Is the matter settled?" The flood dragon said, "Perfected one, it is done. The Gushing Spring Kingdom will send hundreds of people to cultivate Xian techniques in a few days. Zhang Yan casually threw down a Taoist book, and said, "You can still pretend to be the mountain god, and teach this technique to them." When the flood dragon heard this, it revealed a troubled expression, and lowered its head, saying, "I am not good at this, I am afraid that I will make a mistake." Although it was following close to Zhang Yan, it was still a monster raised by the Qinsang school, and not a disciple of Zhao Yu sect. He had heard that there was a monster senior who secretly taught techniques, and then his life was taken away. He must have offended some perfected one of the sect's taboo. Although it was fine to follow orders now, when he returned to the sect, there would be no one to protect him, and that would be the case. Zhang Yan looked at it, and how could he not know what it was thinking? He smiled, "Fine, since you are unwilling, I won't make things difficult for you. You can leave." The flood dragon was a little uneasy, and when he went outside, his younger brother saw him, and he was very surprised. "Big brother, what happened?" The flood dragon told him the reason, and his younger brother exclaimed, "Big brother is muddle-headed. Look at what perfected Zhang is doing, he is obviously trusted by the sect master, and sooner or later he will step into the grotto heaven realm, and become the master of the Dujin Hall. You are just following orders, who would make things difficult for you for such a small matter?" When the flood dragon heard this, he felt that it made sense, and said embarrassedly, "What should I do? Don't tell me I have to go back to receive orders." His younger brother pondered, "Forget it, looking at the situation, us two brothers are going to follow perfected one for a long time, are we afraid that we won't be able to find a chance? We just have to work harder." On the other side, Zhang Yan released the incarnation of Fan Zhen, and he pointed at the center of his brows, and sent a spirit over, "You will replace me and teach in the continent." The incarnation bowed, "Disciple understands, I will not disgrace the sect." At this moment, in his memory, when he was traveling a few years ago, he met a celestial in the mountains, and bumped into this teacher, and he was taught a celestial book. Now that his cultivation was successful, he wanted him to go down the mountain to spread the teachings. Zhang Yan nodded, and after the incarnation bowed respectfully, he left. Zhang Yan looked at his back view, and he suddenly thought that there might be another path to achieve strength path, and he thought to himself, "If I use this method, I wonder if it will work." The method of transformation was ultimately just a divine art, and it did not involve cultivation. Just like the Xianyu Palace's 7 birds transformation, it could not increase one's cultivation at all, but after transforming into a heaven demon's body, it forcefully increased one's cultivation. The 7 birds transformation was just a process of enhancing the divine art, returning to the human body, and returning to the original. There were pros and cons to this, and it was just the best choice when there was no future path, but if there was a more suitable method, there was no need to be stubborn about it. After thinking about it, he smiled, and temporarily cast aside this thought. He was very clear that the path of strength path was just a method to protect Tao, and the path of Qi was his foundation. Moreover, it involved deducing a cultivation method, and it was not something that could be done overnight. He needed to think about it carefully, and there might be a more suitable path in the future, so there was no hurry to start now. He would only think about other things after suppressing the remaining ferocious creatures. He looked towards the south, and the ferocious creature that was sealed here was called the 3-legged tiger-striped swine. This demon was very ferocious, and when it exhaled, it was like fire, and when it inhaled, it could split mountains. In terms of strength, it was second only to the green jade heavenly centipede Guiyuan Jun, not to mention the 10,000-year-old azure dragon. However, he did not know that it was like the demon toad, and it had also escaped from the restriction formation. Chapter 901. Inside the Dragon Carriage Pagoda Pavilion, Zhang Yan sat quietly in his room, overlooking the mountains and rivers. He used his heart to sense the various changes in the continent. This was to investigate the flow of the earth veins and see if he could find the traces of the erosion runes left behind by the sages. In the past month, he had gone around the entire West Sink continent. Now, he had a good grasp of the flow of the earth veins. As for the erosion runes hidden in the mountains and rivers, he had some clues about them. His only regret was that most of the inscriptions were incomplete. Moreover, at the critical moment, the inscriptions were always intermittent. It was difficult to fully understand them. Moreover, it wasn't just one area that was like this. Instead, it was the same for all of them. With his attainments in the path of erosion runes, even if he did not understand a thing or two, it was not to the extent that he could not understand them. It was just a guess, and there must be another reason. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that the erosion runes competition might have covered a much larger area than he had previously thought. It might have covered all 3 continents, and if it went further, it might have covered all the islands in the West Sea. But this was just a guess, and it might not be true. If that was the case, he would not be able to find anything by just looking at the West Sink continent. He had to look at all 3 continents in the West Sea before he could come to a conclusion. Thinking about this, he decided to leave for the next continent as soon as possible. At this moment, a golden nematode flew over from afar. As it neared, it landed on the ground and turned into a pale-faced young man. He carefully walked to the bottom of the pagoda, bowed, and said, "Master, I have returned." Zhang Yan opened the door and said, "Come in and talk." Zhang Chan entered the pavilion, bowed once more, and said, "This lowly one has followed Master's instructions and searched the surrounding 10,000 miles, but I still can't find the hiding place of the demonic toad's divine soul. May I ask Master if this lowly one is able to find it? May I ask, do you want to go out and search?" Zhang Yan said, "The evil toad has lost its body. Even if it could fly 10,000 miles on a talisman, it would not be easy. But this way, it will definitely leave behind some qi, and there will be no trace of it afterwards. It must not have gone far." Zhang Chan whispered, "Master, maybe that demonic toad didn't try to split the spirit?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can it be so easy? This demon has broken free, but he can't leave. Could it be that he doesn't think that someone will come looking for him again? Even a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows, not to mention a 10,000-year-old demon like him. He will definitely leave a way out for himself. You just need to continue searching." Zhang Chan pondered and said, "Although I have many insect soldiers under me, I have a lot of them. However, there are water bodies all around, so it will be troublesome to find them." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The place where he is hiding must be a place that can gather vitality. However, the spiritual energy here is weak and there are not many places like this. You don't have to be impatient. If you search them one by one, it won't be difficult to find some clues." Zhang Chan said, "But it will take a long time and I'm afraid it will delay Master's matter." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves. He said, "It's fine. I'll go to the West Sink continent to take care of that demon swine first. I'll leave the 2 dragons to help you. I'll search slowly with you and we'll plan when I come back." Zhang Chan bowed and agreed. He then puffed out his chest and said, "That demon toad has lost its body, it can't use its supernatural powers. I alone am enough to deal with it. I don't need the help of the 2 brothers." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't be careless. This time, if you can find this monster, you will be able to escape. If you can find this demon this time, I'll give you some benefits." Zhang Chan was overjoyed and said loudly, "I won't let you down." The next day, Zhang Yan left the West Trap continent alone, riding the wind and clouds. He rode the wind and headed towards the West Sink continent in the south. The 3 western continents were less than 10,000 miles apart. To those cultivators who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground, it was very close. He didn't travel far on the sea before he saw strange black and white stones scattered on the surface of the sea. They looked like chess pieces. After chatting with the stone statues on the way here, he naturally knew that this was the border between the 2 continents, the battlefield. These strange stones weren't formed naturally. They were left behind by the cultivators of the 2 continents when they fought for spiritual items. Now that tens of thousands of years had passed, the sea had turned into mulberry fields. The stones were still the same, but the traces of people were nowhere to be found. This was the border between the 2 continents. After this, he would reach the West Sink continent if he continued forward. He stopped here for a while. After looking around, he continued his journey south. Not long after, he saw steep mountains rising from the sea in the distance. They stood eerily. Clouds and mist shrouded the middle of the mountains. Occasionally, birds would cry and spread their wings, flying between the two mountains. The West Sink continent was originally known as the West Source continent. It was rumored that billions of years ago, this continent was loved by the heavens and earth. The continent was rich with spiritual opportunity and nurtured all living things. It was the most spiritual place in the 9 continents in the ancient times. Later on, cultivators of qi established their sects here. The Taoist sects here were the best in the 9 continents. However, when the calamity struck, they suffered the most. Not only did the spiritual opportunity of the continent collapse, half of the continent collapsed and sank to the bottom of the sea. What was seen today was only a part of it. However, it created another strange scene in the West Sink continent. When the stone statue commented on this place, there were 4 sentences. It said, "Thousands of peaks in the forest, wild geese whirl. Half of the mountain collapses and the sky falls. Below the cliff of Tao Seeking, the crane is gone, it's hard to become a celestial." After 1,000 miles into the continent, he could see land. However, when he looked over, he realized that it was mostly bare and cold rocks. There were no signs of people. Even the plants and living things only existed in the cracks between the rocks. Zhang Yan could not help but sigh. Although this continent was not far from the West Sink continent, the spiritual opportunity here was much weaker. Some places were even devoid of life. It was obvious that the aftermath of the calamity had not dissipated yet. Thinking back to what the Yuxiao school did, it was no wonder that the Qinsang school did not object to letting the people of the Xianmen go to the small world. It turned out that there was a precedent. If someone in the Donghua continent tried to touch the roots, they would definitely end up like this. At this stage, where would the cultivators go to live? There was no place like Donghua in the 9 continents that could provide for the cultivators of the world. When that time came, they could only pretend to be strong and fight to the death. From his point of view, this was not impossible. Moreover, he had not passed through the 3 calamities. The only way to protect himself was to find the Dharma access as soon as possible and train his cultivation experience and supernatural powers to the point where he could not control them. When he thought of this, his eyes revealed a look of determination. After adjusting his breath in the sky, he headed southwest according to the direction that sect leader Qin had pointed out. On the 5th day, he found the forbidden land in a valley. He pressed down the cloud and looked down from above. What he saw was a huge pit that was more than 1,000 feet wide and bottomless. He stretched out a finger and a talisman floated into the room. However, after looking around, he found that the room was empty. There used to be an underground palace like the Xianyu Palace, but it had long collapsed into rubble. It no longer had any value. He squinted his eyes. As expected, he was too late. The ferocious creature had already escaped. He looked around for a while and thought to himself, looking at the traces of soil and rocks below, this ferocious creature has been gone for at least 100 years. I wonder if it escaped to another continent or is still in the continent. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeves and flew into the sky again. He then looked around. After a while, he saw a green shadow in the southeast. There was a faint aura of life. There seems to be life there. It's in the southeast. If the demon swine wants to go to another continent, it must pass by. I can go there to investigate. He summoned his will, and a sword light flew out, wrapped around him, and turned into a rainbow as it flew away. An hour later, he saw a wisp of smoke in the sky. He knew that there were traces of people here. The 3-legged demon swine was huge. After escaping, it definitely couldn't transform into a human. If it had been here before, there should be some clues. Not far away, he suddenly felt his body warm up. It wasn't as cold as other places. He sensed carefully and realized that it was only limited to these 1,000 or so regions. This abnormality attracted his attention and he stopped. He glanced over and was slightly shocked. In the forest below, there was a flat open space. There was an altar built in it. It was 20 feet tall and had a strict layout. It was obvious that it was used to gather qi. Could it be that there are also cultivators here? Or is it the work of the demon swine? Just as he was guessing, he saw hundreds of people coming out of the forest. They carried animals like dogs, horses, cows, and sheep to the altar. They then knelt and kowtowed. Following that, under the instructions of an old man with a strong body and a full beard, they placed them one by one. However, there was no officiator on the altar. There weren't any rituals or rules. Looking at everyone's expression, they all had a look of fear. After putting down the cows and sheep, everyone retreated in a panic. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and descended from the clouds, but no one noticed him. He arrived in front of the old man, cupped his fists, and said, "Sir, may I know what you are worshipping?" The old man didn't know when a stranger had appeared beside him. He was shocked and sized him up. He cupped his hands and asked cautiously, "Sir, are you the celestial master of Firestorm Ridge?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm not from Firestorm Ridge. I came from the north and traveled all the way here. I came across everyone worshipping an empty altar, so I came up to ask." The old man exclaimed, "Celestial Master came from the north. You must be very capable." He paused and said, "Celestial Master is an outsider. No wonder you don't know this place." He pointed to a mountain in the distance that looked like a sharp awl. "This place is called Ji Muyuan. About 100 years ago, a great god fell into the mortal world and happened to land here. Rumor has it that this god was wronged by the heavenly court. He roared at the sky all day long, his voice shaking thousands of miles. He also breathed fire, wind, and fog. There was a saying that smoke and dust covered the sun, and no light could be seen for 3 months. But this ruined our livelihood. Later, we begged a few celestial masters to come up the mountain and offered hundreds of young boys and girls. Finally, we made an agreement with the great god to build a temple at the foot of the mountain and offer offerings on this day every year. Only then did the mountain god's anger be suppressed. But in the past few decades, there were still some troubles from time to time. It's only in recent years that things have gotten better." After listening, Zhang Yan immediately knew that the so-called fire god was most likely the demon swine. This demon was different from the thousand-eyed toad. Although its life pearl was also taken, it had the ability to use the astral wind and earth fire to cultivate its true essence. Otherwise, it wouldn't have escaped with its body. And the situation here was most likely caused by stealing the earth fire and piercing the earth aperture. Maybe at this moment, it was hiding somewhere under his feet. Chapter 902. After Zhang Yan chatted with the old man, he understood the situation. He separated from the rest and flew up into the sky, heading towards the wind and fire ridge. The offerings of mortals were useless to sky demons, but cultivators who had just started cultivating qi needed this to replenish their qi. Those celestial masters on the ridge were very suspicious. Maybe they were like the demon toad, purposely made up by the three-legged swine. The ridge was not far from the altar. He arrived in a short while. Looking down from a high place, he saw that the mountain was barren. There was no vegetation, no beasts or birds. It was all jagged rocks, like a land of death. There was only a temple built with large rocks standing at the waist of the mountain. It was very easy to recognize. There were no formations protecting it. The plaque in front of the temple was broken, the words were long blurred, the entrance was overgrown with weeds, like no one had taken care of it for a long time. After watching for a while, he descended and strode into the temple. Just as he entered, he felt a wave of heat coming at him, like he had fallen into a furnace. His eyes flashed. With his cultivation and mana, he still felt this way. People with weaker mana would not be able to last long in this place. He looked straight ahead, passing through the front door. In less than 20 steps, he arrived at the main hall. He raised his head to take a look and saw that inside the shrine there was a statue of a deity howling towards the sky, with a long trident in both hands. It looked like it was dancing angrily. The sculpture was originally very majestic and imposing, but now it was covered with dust and grime, and most of its golden armor had fallen off, making it look shabby and shabby. The candles on the offering table had long been empty, and a thick layer of soot had accumulated in the incense burner. Zhang Yan could see that this place should have been abandoned long ago. He looked left and right but did not find anything. He went around the statue and went straight to the back hall. That was the source of the heat. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the bottom of the mountain. Below him was a several dozen zhang-wide sinkhole. A gust of hot air gushed out from the sinkhole, and a scarlet light shone up, illuminating the walls red. It was like he was inside a furnace. He tried to sense it. He did not detect any energy movement. After thinking for a while, he tapped his feet and floated down. The deeper he went, the stronger the heat wave. In the end, his eyes were filled with red light. However, his expression did not change. After descending for about 3,000 feet, he finally reached the bottom of the pit. This situation was even stranger. There were more than 10 dried corpses sitting cross-legged on praying mats. Their clothes had long since decayed, and the face of the corpse in the middle looked as if it was still alive, as if it had just fallen asleep. In its hand was a jade slip that was as bright as new. Zhang Yan glanced at it. The jade slip flew up and stopped in front of him. Holding it in his hand, his spiritual sense surged into it and he instantly saw through it. This was an extremely shallow cultivation method, and it was somewhat similar to the essence qi that the demons used before they took human form. He snorted coldly. With just a glance, one could tell that this kind of cultivation method was created by a demonic cultivator. Moreover, the demonic cultivators in this world were not the direct descendants of the 8 tribes. Even if they passed down their cultivation methods, they would mostly focus on the path of strength. From this, it could be seen that the person in charge of this place was definitely related to that ferocious creature. However, he didn't know how the demon was doing. Since it was here, it should have already sensed something, but it didn't have any reaction at all. He thought for a while and vaguely guessed a possibility. He threw the jade slip away and continued to walk deeper into the pit. After walking for another mile, after turning a corner, his eyes unconsciously focused. Not far in front of him, there was a ferocious creature lying at the bottom of the pit. From head to tail, it was about 300 feet in size. Its nose and ears were wide open, its fangs were exposed, and it had black sideburns on its back. Under its abdomen, it had 3 legs, 1 in the front and 2 at the back. The front leg was like a short, curled up, and the back leg was as thick as a pillar. Its body was surrounded by a layer of scarlet fire, as if it was wearing a red robe. The heat in the mountain was emitted from its body. However, this great demon's eyes were closed, and there was no sign of life. It was obvious that it had been dead for a long time. Before Zhang Yan came here, he had expected many situations. He thought that it would be another fierce battle, but he didn't expect this result. It was a little unexpected. After looking for a while, he walked closer and examined it again. Suddenly, his eyes flashed, and he reached out to grab it. When he took it back, there was an extra item in his palm. He opened it and saw that it was a vermilion pearl. It could be seen that it was originally a treasure, but it had lost its spirit. He said calmly, "So it's the Huiyue pill." With a light pinch, the item turned into dust in his hand, and a small amount of it leaked out from the gaps of his fingers. At first, he didn't understand. After all, it was a sky demon. Even if it was in dire straits, as long as it kept its blood essence and soul, it would definitely not die. However, seeing this item, he immediately understood and more or less guessed the whole story. This big swine was suppressed for more than 10,000 years. When it finally escaped, it was like the demon swine, extremely weak. It was probably afraid that someone would come to capture it again, so it used its strength to escape from the Forbidden Land. When it escaped here, it should have used up the last bit of Yuan Qi. It must have felt that the earth fire here was strong, so it wanted to open its earth aperture and absorb the earth fire to nourish itself. However, man proposes, God disposes. Someone planted a Huiyue pill here many years ago. This pill was also a rare item. When cultivators refined their treasures, they mostly opened up the earth fire heavenly furnace. However, if they traveled outside, it was often inconvenient to use it. However, this treasure pill was different. This pill could be thrown into the ground to absorb fire chi when it was free. When traveling outside, it could be carried by one's side. When it was inconvenient, it could be taken out and used as the heavenly furnace. After the disaster of the western sunken continent, the mountains and rivers collapsed, and the land's spirit was cut off. It was unknown whether the owner of this treasure pill forgot or an accident happened, but it was not taken away and was left here. Although this kind of treasure could absorb fire, there was a limit. After it was full, it naturally could not be contained, and it would inevitably spread out. When the demon swine passed by and felt the heat, it might have mistakenly thought that this was the place where the earth fire ran, so it stopped. If it had obtained this fire bead when it was complete, it might have been able to use it to recover some of its strength. Unfortunately, after 10,000 years, even if it had some fire chi, it had mostly dissipated. If it was absorbed again, it would probably disappear in an instant. And the demon swine did not need its life origin bead to absorb fire chi, but it needed its own essence, blood and soul. It must have used up its last bit of yuan chi, but by the time it realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Once the demon died, the fire on its body naturally spread out. How could the cultivators on the wind and fire ridge withstand it? They immediately died on the spot. Zhang Yan sighed. In the end, divine arts are no match for fate. No matter how strong you are, you can't escape from the unfathomable might of heaven. He shook his head and summoned the demon-subduing slip. A bright light flew out from between his brows and pounced on the body of the fierce beast, penetrating it like a phantom. He went to the side and sat down to wait quietly. After about 2 days, the body of the sky demon was completely transformed into essence and absorbed into the slip. Only a shriveled skin that was emitting blazing scarlet flames was still on the ground. He raised his sleeve and took it into his hand. When he touched it, he did not feel any heat at all. Instead, he felt waves of coolness. This item was called the vermilion robe. If the demon swine was still alive, it could be made into a precious robe and worn on the body. It could avoid all the fires in the world. In the past, countless brilliant cultivators fought with this great demon for this, but no one was able to do as they wished. Later on, although the great underworld patriarch suppressed it, he thought that his cultivation was profound and did not care about such an item. Now, although it had fallen into his hands, it was not a joke after 10,000 years, and he did not know how much of its effect was left. He thought for a moment, shook his sleeve lightly, and put it away. Right at this moment, he suddenly heard an unusual sound by his ear, and it seemed to be coming from extremely far away. He frowned slightly and flew up into the sky. In a flash, he came out of the pit and stood in midair while his gaze shot towards the source of the sound. He saw that there were undercurrents surging outside the continent, and the waves shook the heavens as if monstrous waves were brewing. He looked at it for a moment and pondered, so that's how it is. This demon swine's body here has unintentionally suppressed the spiritual vigor of the land, thus there are fewer tsunamis and landslides. Now that I've dissolved its body, there are no more barriers. Fine, I'll do what I did in the west sinking continent that day again. So that it has a way to avoid disaster. He did what he thought and immediately sat down. After a few days, he refined another drop of demon blood and used the mortal truth technique to refine another incarnation. The last incarnation was a middle-aged Taoist, but this time, it was a handsome young man. He sat down and bowed, "Celestial Master, I will leave now." With that, he straightened up and went down the mountain. Zhang Yan thought, I did not waste much time in the central west sinking continent, why don't I go to the west Jew continent? If I can finish off the demons in that continent, I can first settle my Tao heart and observe the inscriptions here. With his mind made up, he did not hesitate. The rainbow light on his body grew longer, and a streak of light could be seen in the sky as he headed straight for the West Jew continent. After a day and a night, he crossed the sea and land and arrived at the West Jew continent. The continent was long and narrow. As far as the eye could see, one could see an endless mountain ridge that stretched from the north to the south, cutting through the continent. This was the image of a coiling dragon. Among the 9 continents, the land veins here were the clearest. From the sky, it looked like a living dragon was sleeping underground. However, after the calamity, the head fell off, the tail was broken, and the spine was broken. A good earth dragon was destroyed. Although the other 2 continents had suffered from the calamity, they had been struggling at death's door for dozens of years before completely losing their spiritual vigor. However, this continent had become a land of death in just a few months after the earth veins were broken. When the stone statue talked about this continent, it left behind 4 sentences: the dragon's head drinks the blue waves in the north, the dragon's tail plays with the cold mountains in the south. When the universe moves, the wind and clouds change, the merciless heavenly Tao is mysterious. Zhang Yan flew along the mountain range for a day and arrived at the place where Grandmaster Tai Ming sealed the demon. It happened to be a large gap on the back of the earth dragon. This heavenly demon was called White-Headed Fengyo. It was the most mysterious among the 6 beasts, and was rumored to have come from beyond the heavens. Even when the ancient cultivators fought with the heavenly demon, it rarely appeared and did not use any powerful divine abilities. But since it was sealed here by Grandmaster Tai Ming, it was not easy to deal with. He had always been cautious and was not in a hurry to descend. After observing for a long time in the sky, he used his mana to protect himself and walked into the Rift Valley. Chapter 903. Zhang Yan turned into a ray of light and flew to the bottom of the valley. After a few breaths, he arrived at the bottom. At this moment, there was a deep pit in front of him. From the sand on the outside of the pit, he could tell that it was made from the inside out. His expression did not change. The spiritual vigor of the 3 western continents was not flourishing. The time to restrain the sky demon was even shorter than he had imagined. Since the first 2 sky demons had escaped before he arrived, then it was expected that this one could escape the restriction. But there seemed to be something strange about the surroundings. He could not sense the specific situation below. After careful observation, he saw that there were many colorful stones around. He immediately understood. This stone was called the ingenious embroidery stone. If a cultivator used this to build an altar, it would be twice the result with half the effort. However, the stones in front of him weren't naturally formed. Instead, they were moved here by someone. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what the fierce demon was doing. He pondered for a while and decided to explore. He waved his sleeves and floated in. The bottom of the pit was deep and dark, the bottom could not be seen. There seemed to be an unknown spiritual vigor circling around it. Even with his mana, he could only see 100 feet ahead. As he descended, there were occasional pebbles falling. After a long time, there was an echo of emptiness. The further he went down, the narrower the path. After about a quarter of an hour, he finally reached the ground. At this moment, he saw 2 tunnels in front of him. In the middle, there was a big stone with words written on it: "If a guest from afar is here, please take the left path." Zhang Yan thought for a while. This demon must have expected that someone would come to capture it, so it left it behind. This demon was not ordinary. Other sky demons were extremely afraid of being sealed again. They wanted to erase all traces of their family, but it did not seem to be afraid of people knowing. Zhang Yan wanted to see exactly what kind of arrangements this Fengyo had made to actually have such confidence. He smiled and walked to the left as he was told. When he reached the tunnel, he suddenly felt a stuffy feeling. It was different from the fire on the demon swine. It was extremely dry and hot. It was extremely dry and unbearable. Deep in his heart, there was an inexplicable irritation. He activated his Xian Qi and his mind became clear. At the same time, he was a little surprised. This white-headed raging bull was quite powerful. It can cause epidemics and droughts. Everywhere it passed, water and trees withered, and humans and animals died. Now that he could sense it, could it be that it was still here? His eyes flashed, but his feet didn't stop. He traveled along the winding tunnel for 4 to 5 miles. When he reached the end, he turned around and entered a cave. He saw a ball of gentle light in front of him, like a warm jade or a warm sun. When he got closer to take a look, he saw that there was a large boulder there, and on top of it was a white-headed bull. It had a single eye on its face, and its tail was like a long snake. Its entire body was like a crystalline glazed jade, and it shone brightly. At this moment, it seemed to be sleeping soundly. Zhang Yan took a few glances and confirmed that there was no soul attached to the body at all. It was just an empty shell. He raised his eyebrows. Could it be that this raging bull was so decisive, abandoning its body here and only taking off its soul? At this moment, his gaze turned and was attracted by a stone tablet at the side. He took a few steps forward and saw a line of words left on it. It said, "My body is here. If any junior wants it, just take it. Remember to owe me a favor. If you don't fulfill it, I will personally come from beyond the heavens to ask for it." He thought about it. Listening to the tone of the words, it seemed like it didn't care about the body. However, since this demon came from beyond the heavens, it wasn't surprising that it had such methods. Of course, it could have purposely played tricks, and the soul went to hide somewhere else. If he wanted to find it, it wouldn't be that easy. No matter what, he had to keep this body first. Even if this demon could cultivate and return, it would take at least tens of thousands of years. As for the so-called cause and effect, he laughed coldly and didn't care about it at all. Back then, this bull was suppressed by the great underworld ancestor, and it wasn't that it was willing to be restrained here. Now, it made it sound like it was taking care of a junior. He was originally here on orders to get rid of future troubles. Even if he was really implicated, the first one would fall on the great underworld ancestor. If this demon was still here, he would ask, "Do you dare to ask for it back?" He shook his sleeves and took out the demon-subduing slip. After the slip swallowed 2 heaven demon bodies, the light on the slip became brighter. After circling around the bull for a while, it suddenly turned into light and shone down, covering it. Zhang Yan waited at the side for 3 days before the light slowly dissipated. When it reformed into the shape of the demon-subduing slip, it let out a clear cry and flew back. He lifted his sleeves and let it fall in. At this moment, on the ground, there was only a pile of snow-like jade shards and 2 gray-black horns. He knew that they were good items, so he kept them. He looked around a few more times, and seeing that there were no more abnormalities in the cave, he used his spiritual power and turned into a streak of light, heading back the way he came. Now that this demon had been taken away, there was only one sky demon left among the 6 great ferocious beasts, apart from the missing 10,000-year-old azure dragon. It was the son of the azure dragon and a female flood dragon. It was a green-scaled flood dragon. However, because its father was captured and killed by the great underworld ancestor, it stirred up trouble out of anger and was sealed. As a result, it was the weakest of the 6. The place it was sealed was in the East Lai continent. He had already made up his mind. After he finished reading the West Lai continent's inscriptions, he would go there. His return journey was very fast. 5 days later, he arrived at the inner world of the Westfall continent. He stood in the sky and threw out a token. He used his mana to guide it, and after a while, he heard the roars of dragons. 2 dragons pulled the carriage from the clouds. A ray of golden light flew out from the carriage and shook for a moment before Zhang Chan appeared. He came up and clasped his hands. He was pleasantly surprised and said, "Master has returned?" Zhang Yan nodded. It had only been a month since he left, which was much shorter than he had expected. This was a good thing because he would have more time to study the West Lai continent's inscriptions. He asked, "Did you notice anything during the time I was gone?" Zhang Chan quickly replied, "Master, I searched a lot of places but couldn't find any trace of the toad. I only found a cave in the southwest that seems to be left behind by the ancient Taoist sect. However, I don't know what the cave was made of, but it was very sturdy." I couldn't enter no matter how hard I tried, and I don't know if the demon is hiding inside. At this point, one of the flood dragons interrupted, Zhang Chan isn't lying. I also tried. The stone is extremely hard. Even if the old demon isn't inside, there must be some treasure hidden inside. Zhang Yan knew that there were many caves left behind by ancient sects in the West continent, so it wasn't strange to find some. This kind of cave could also be the hiding place of the demon swine, so he couldn't ignore it. He said, "You go there and keep an eye on it. I'll go check it out myself tomorrow. If the demon is really hiding there, I'll remember that it's your credit." Zhang Chan responded loudly and then left excitedly. The two WIRMs looked at each other and came over as well. They said with saliva on their faces, "Perfected one, Zhang Chan's insects really can't walk underwater." We brothers also contributed a lot in finding that underwater abode. Zhang Yan smiled and threw 2 bottles of pills to the 2 flood dragons as a reward for their hard work. The 2 flood dragons accepted it with joy. They were willing to stay by Zhang Yan's side. First, they were optimistic about his future. Second, he was the disciple of Danding Courtyard's Zhou Chengju. They could get whatever pills they couldn't get their hands on. By following him, they could always get some benefits. On the second day, Zhang Yan followed Zhang Chan's directions and rode the flood dragon carriage to the water area. After traveling for about 200 li, Zhang Chan pointed at an island below and said, "Master, that immortal's cave is about 150 zhang underwater. I've placed 3 white stones outside the door, so it won't be difficult to identify it." Zhang Yan looked at the surrounding terrain and found that this place was very close to the gushing spring continent. There were several islands with lush greenery around it. Mist and clouds floated in the air. The water was cold and the sky was high. The spiritual essence was also slightly more abundant than elsewhere. No matter how he looked at it, it was a good place to hide. He said, "You wait here. I'll go down and take a look." After saying that, he turned into a wisp of green smoke and used the water escape technique to dive down. Today, most of the islands on the water were dangerous mountains that stood at the top of the clouds in the past. This place was no exception. Walking along the mountain ridge, he soon arrived at the place Zhang Chan mentioned. Sure enough, he saw a cave. The cave door was about 10 feet tall. On the door, there was a pair of black carps connected head to tail. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He reached out and knocked on it. He thought to himself, "So it's the green cupstone." Looking at it, the entire cave is built with this kind of stone. No wonder Zhang Chan couldn't open it. In ancient times, many unorthodox cultivators practiced the method of primordial spirit projection. This green cupstone was used to store the body. Not to mention that it was extremely sturdy, there might even be a prohibition talisman carved inside. Without powerful means, it was extremely difficult to open it. However, this kind of sturdy stone could not prevent people with strong mana from peeping with their dharma eyes. Naturally, it could not prevent the spirit from entering and exiting. Zhang Yan used his power with his eyes. He turned into a ray of light and looked inside. In an instant, he could see the scenery inside clearly. It was a stone room that was about 10 feet in size. There were about 10 big jars with milky white wine inside. It was actually a cultivator's wine storage place. Apart from that, there was nothing unusual. He pondered for a moment. He went up and returned to the surface of the water. Then, he called the double dragons and Zhang Chan to him and asked, "Not to mention that this place is secretive, there is no flow of spiritual opportunity. How did you guys find it?" Zhang Chan said, "That day, one of my insect soldiers noticed that there was a pearl light coming from the water, so I followed it, but I couldn't find the source. I was afraid that it was the evil toad, so I personally came here to search, and only then did I find this cave." Zhang Yan listened and was deep in thought. Zhang Chan asked carefully, "Master, did you find any traces?" Zhang Yan shook his head slightly. Zhang Chan looked disappointed and said, "So it's not here." Zhang Yan smiled and said meaningfully, "You guys don't have to be discouraged. Come back here in a few days. Maybe you'll find something. Zhang Chan widened his eyes and said, Master, you mean? Zhang Yan smiled and said, don't ask too much. Whether it's true or not, you'll know in a few days. After that, he sat on the dragon carriage and instructed. The two dragons shook their bodies and pulled the carriage. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the clouds. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 904. Just after Zhang Yan left, on an island, a green toad jumped out from the crevice of a rock. Its eyes coldly looked at the sky, then it leaped into the water, and after a while, it swam to the front of the underwater palace. It opened its big mouth, and spat out a ray of golden light, hitting the stone door. With a rumbling sound, the door opened with a loud bang. It leaped forward and quickly scuttled into the cave. With another loud noise, the cave door closed once more. After entering the room, it thought, if the junior can't find me here, he will look for me elsewhere. He won't come back here for the time being. It's safe now. All along, it had never hidden in any secret place of the cave residence. Instead, it attached its spirit to a green toad and used that to avoid the insect soldier's search. However, this was not a long-term plan after all. However, it was difficult to find a body to store his spirit. Even this green toad was carefully selected. Moreover, it needed his blood to maintain at all times. If there was an accident, he would not be able to change to another body. By then, his spirit would have no place to rely on. However, what made it difficult for him was that once he used his blood to refine the body, there would be demonic aura leaking out. He was afraid that he would be noticed immediately. Hence, he had to find a safe place. He came across this cave residence by accident when he was looking for treasures after he escaped. Previously, he did not pay much attention to it. However, now, it was a good place to go. However, even if he hid in there, he would eventually be found out. As a last resort, he took the risk and played a small trick. First, he tried to attract the attention of Zhang Yan and asked them to investigate. After they left, he moved in because he had already explored this place. He expected that they would not come back again. Hence, he could spend a period of time in peace. He laid on the ground and slowly separated a strand of blood. He began to carefully refine the body. If the spiritual vigor was strong, as long as there was enough time, it could evolve into the heavenly demon's body again. However, now, he could only adjust it slightly so that the blood would not be consumed too much. About 10 days later, he seemed to have sensed some danger. He was shocked. He looked up and stared outside. He saw 2 dragon figures circling outside the underwater residence. How could he not know that his plan had been seen through by the other party? His heart skipped a beat. If they waited for the main character to arrive, then there would be no chance of survival. In a moment of desperation, it opened the stone door and rushed out. It understood in its heart that if it didn't risk its life now, it would definitely not be able to rush out. As soon as it reached the outside world, it desperately urged its blood essence, and its figure instantly grew explosively. In the blink of an eye, it was over 100 feet tall. Its abdomen swelled up and emitted a strange gurgling sound. After that, it opened its mouth and inhaled, and the surrounding waters of a few dozen li were immediately stirred up by a boundless whirlpool. The 2 flood dragons were pulled along by the flow of water, and they were shocked. They were spirits of the water, and controlling water and clouds was an innate ability. However, at this moment, it was as if they had fallen into mud, and it was extremely difficult for them to move. They didn't expect this demon to have such abilities even at this stage. They struggled to break free, but this divine ability seemed to have the same effect as the heaven and earth seal. For a moment, they couldn't do anything and could only be dragged in step by step. The demon's eyes revealed a sinister look, and it thought in its heart, I'll swallow these 2 little flood dragons first to replenish some of my vitality, then I can escape. Just as it was about to succeed, a thin strand of golden light suddenly fell from the top of its head. Its whole body quivered, and it felt that it was not a good thing. It didn't dare to resist, and hurriedly leaped to the side. However, at this moment, a shell leaf suddenly flew over, as if it had been waiting there for a long time. A ray of light fell on its head, and immediately enveloped it. Then, the light spun in the air, and became smaller and smaller. Finally, it became the size of an inch, broke through the water, and flew into the sky. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand in the air, and caught it in his palm. He sensed for a while, and saw that the spirit was hiding in a drop of blood essence, and it seemed that it still didn't want to admit defeat. He smiled faintly, took out a talisman, stuck it on it, and threw it into his sleeve. Then, he went to the tower in the sky. When he sat down in the tower, he took out a rui, and waved it lightly. Smoke rose in front of him, and a three-legged copper cauldron appeared out of nowhere. He pinched it with 2 fingers, and took out the spirit of the demon shovel, and threw it into the cauldron. Now that the demon had reached this stage, it couldn't cause any more waves, and there was no need for him to do it himself. With this cauldron, it wouldn't take long for it to be refined. An hour later, Zhang Yan examined the cauldron, and there was no trace of the demon left in the cauldron. He knew that the demon had been completely eradicated, and he couldn't help but think, the demons of the 3 continents have been wiped out, and I can calm down and participate in the 3-continent erosion runes. After thinking for a while, he summoned the 2 flood dragons and Zhang Chan into the tower, and said, I need to go into seclusion to comprehend Tao, and I don't know when I will succeed. There are many pills in the cauldron, and you can take them and cultivate on your own. Don't wait for me to summon you, and don't come over. Zhang Chan said, Master, I'm willing to serve by your side. The 2 flood dragons also expressed their loyalty. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said, When I need you, I will summon you. Go. The 3 of them didn't dare to say another word, and they retreated. After the 3 of them left, Zhang Yan sat quietly in the tower for 3 days, and then he tried to search for the erosion runes hidden in the 3 continents. This time, he didn't have to worry about anything, and he didn't have anything to worry about, so he opened up his mind and didn't stick to a corner of a continent. Instead, he tried to sense the spiritual vigor in the mountains and rivers. In the sky above the 3 western continents, pagodas floated in the sky, from north to south, from east to west, accompanied by the moon and the sun. They floated for more than 10 years. The mortals of the 3 continents didn't know about the stars, and they only thought that there was a god-master sky lantern in the sky, and they constantly worshipped it. Zhang Yan was immersed in it, and he didn't know how much time had passed. One day, his body trembled slightly, and he retreated from his meditation. However, there was still a hint of contemplation in his eyes. What was recorded in the inscription was a battle of principles between 2 cultivators who had different Tao paths. As for the identity of both parties, it was impossible to find out. However, the general course of events was that one of them believed that the path of the heavens and man were different. To use a human to peer into the heavenly Tao, one must abandon oneself and follow the heavens. Only by not giving birth to oneself could one live forever. If one didn't do this, one wouldn't be able to attain the Tao. On the other hand, the other side believed that humans were creatures born from the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Everything they did was within the natural order of things. The will of the heavens was our will, and our will was the will of the heavens. If one was firm in one's Tao, then a small movement would form the universe. Neither of them could convince the other, so they used the scenery of the 3 western continents to set up the eroded inscriptions in an attempt to attract the support of their fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan had no way of knowing the outcome of this battle. This time, he only managed to understand 10 to 20% of it. Due to the limitations of his own cultivation, he was unable to understand many of the profound and abstruse descriptions. Moreover, there was something strange about it. Many places were hidden. He spoke vaguely, but it didn't seem like he was trying to hide something. Instead, it seemed like he was avoiding something. What was worth mentioning was that the 2 of them were carving on one side of the world. Because of the wonderful evolution. They actually predicted the future calamity of the 3 western continents at the same time. However, both of them believed that the world gave birth to all things. It could be destroyed or created, it could be destroyed or created, and they didn't take it to heart. They only mentioned it at the end. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully and felt that the two of them were arguing about whether the heaven controlled oneself or the heaven controlled oneself, whether the heaven Tao was the human Tao, or the human Tao was the heaven Tao. From his point of view, the former path of abandoning oneself was definitely not one to pursue. If one had to choose, it would definitely be the latter path. As he thought about it, suddenly, an indescribable mysterious feeling rose in his heart. His expression changed slightly, and he sensed again. He realized that the vein of the eroded inscriptions that advocated abandoning oneself and following the heaven had disappeared. He couldn't see a trace of it anymore, as if it had never appeared. He thought about it and suddenly understood. It turned out that there was no such thing as right or wrong, victory or defeat. The Tao that the Taoist cultivators agreed with was the Tao that won. At this point, he couldn't help but fall into deep thought. No matter what, this is still the Tao of others. What is my Tao? Yuxiao School, Moving Star Palace. A cultivator in his 30s in a robe with a feather fan in his hand walked into the alchemy room. He bowed to Wu Fenggu and said, "Greetings, Senior Martial Brother." Wu Fenggu raised his hand and invited him to sit down. He said, "Junior Martial Brother, is there a message from the clan elder?" The middle-aged cultivator gently waved his feather fan. "Even if I don't say it, Senior Martial Brother can guess it." Wu Fenggu said indifferently, "Junior Martial Brother, if you have something to say, just say it." The middle-aged cultivator looked at him with bright eyes. "The clan elder sent me to ask. A few days ago, Senior Martial Brother summoned Senior Martial Brother." "What did he say? Why didn't he report it afterwards?" Wu Fenggu's face was expressionless. He said, "Nothing much. He just wanted to give me some pointers. Also, in a few months, Senior Martial Brother Zhou will finish his closed-door training." The eldest disciple of Yuxiao, Zhou Yong, was superior to Wu Fenggu in both the reputation of the sect and the evaluation of the world. However, ever since he went into closed-door training, he hadn't come out for more than 200 years. Thus, all the matters in the sect, big or small, were handled by Zhou Yong. When the middle-aged cultivator heard this, his hands stopped moving. He frowned and said, "This is a big matter. Why doesn't Senior Martial Brother fight for it?" "Are you really willing to?" Wu Fenggu interrupted him. "This may not be a bad thing. In the sect, those who are capable will rise. The three great tribulations will only become more and more intense in the next 1,000 years. If Senior Martial Brother Zhou has the ability, you will naturally lead the group. I have no complaints." The middle-aged cultivator glanced at Wu Fenggu with a strange expression. He then shook his head and sighed. He said with a hint of mockery, "I heard that Shao Qing, Qing Qinzi, and Qin Song's Qi Yuntian have already reached this stage. If they can survive the tribulations, the three of them will control the overall situation. As for the others, they will probably be like the stars accompanying the moon, losing their luster." However, Wu Fenggu didn't seem to understand the meaning behind his words. He said calmly, "Perhaps there's one more person." The middle-aged cultivator nodded. "Of course. That Yuan Hongyang can't be underestimated either." Wu Fenggu shook his head. "I'm only talking about the disciples of the celestial sect." The middle-aged cultivator's eyes lit up. He leaned forward and said, "Who do you think it is, Senior Martial Brother?" Wu Fenggu looked at him and said slowly, "Qin Song's Zhang Yan." The middle-aged cultivator was startled. After a while, he nodded and said, "In terms of talent, there are indeed very few people in our generation who can surpass Zhang Yan. However, Senior Martial Brother, don't forget that he has only cultivated for 300 years. Moreover, it will be 400 to 500 years later. Why do we need to mention it now?" Wu Fenggu said indifferently, "Let's just wait and see." He stood up and said in a meaningful tone, "Junior Apprentice Brother, don't forget that Zhang Yan has a grudge against the Zhou clan." With that, he turned around and walked into the inner hall, leaving the middle-aged cultivator standing there in a daze. Chapter 905. After Zhang Yan read the inscriptions left behind by the two sages, although he did not find the method to achieve the ultimate Tao, he had found a trace of a clue. He understood that the so-called emotionless and emotionless was a generalization. Just like how the heavens were divided into yin and yang, all things could not escape from it. And the path that he was searching for, in more detail, was within the Tao of emotion. When he was observing it that day, he had vaguely grasped a hint of mystery. Unfortunately, it was only for a moment. After he settled his mind, it was hard to find again. Because of this, he realized that perhaps when he recognized the Tao of emotion, his future path was already different. The Tao of emotionless was that the heavens and earth were not benevolent. There was no joy or sorrow, no thoughts or thoughts. In cultivation, one did not know where they came from, did not know the past. As long as one rejected the paths that did not belong to oneself, one would naturally reach the true path. As for the Tao of emotion, it was to observe the wonders of the changes in the heavens and observe the workings of the universe. All things existed in one's heart. Finally, one would be enlightened and see the true essence. From then on, one would be able to reach the spirit path. He knew that this step was like the difference between heaven and earth. It was difficult to achieve in a hurry. After thinking for a moment, he decided to first go to the Donglai continent. As for this matter, he could slowly think about it on the way. There were two ways to go to the Donglai continent. One was to go to the land of sunset and cross the endless ocean. The other was to go from west to east and retrace his steps. If he went back, it would be inexcusable to pass through the mountain gate and not enter. Right now, the East Flower continent was in the midst of the three great tribulations. The mystic and demonic paths were at war. Since he had already left his position and had not completed his cultivation, it was not the best time to go back. After some consideration, he decided to go west. Beyond the three western continents was a place called the Muddy Ocean. Needless to say, the wind was high, the waves were strong, and the lightning was fierce. It was said that there were demonic fish monsters that had survived from ancient times until now. Their bodies were thousands of feet long. Whether it was ancient or modern, the records all referred to it as a wild world. However, these monsters were powerful in terms of spiritual power, but their intelligence was inferior to that of ordinary demons. The ancient sky demons that Zhang Yan had fought before could not be compared. Therefore, he did not take it to heart. Moreover, after passing the West Continent, there would be no more golden moon bugs in the sky, so he could travel above the high cloud and rest when he was tired. A few days later, the twin dragons and Zhang Chan were summoned. All of them rushed back from afar. He only asked a few questions. Following his order, a flood dragon carriage left the continent. It plunged into the endless ocean. The sun rose and the moon set. The tides rose and fell. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. That day, after traveling for a long time, the two flood dragons felt tired and had no choice but to descend from the sky. Flying above the astral clouds, one could borrow the astral winds to travel quickly, but the winds would still cut through one's bones and flesh. The two flood dragons would fly for a period of time, then they would have to descend to the sea to devour blood and flesh and absorb essence energy. After 10 days or so, their vital energy would recover, and only then would they be able to return to the universe. Over the past year, Zhang Chan had experienced this situation many times and knew what to do. He immediately sent the insect soldiers to all 4 directions to prevent the monsters in the sea from coming over to disturb them. Actually, such monsters usually hid deep in the sea and rarely showed themselves. The possibility of bumping into one on the endless ocean was extremely small. However, not long after, he felt something in his heart. It seemed like an insect soldier had discovered something, and a look of listening appeared on his face. Then, his expression turned joyful. He walked in front of the carriage and bowed respectfully, "Old master, just now, my insect soldiers have discovered an island on the ocean. There is a formation guarding it, and it seems like there are cultivators there." During these days, Zhang Yan had been comprehending the mysteries in the pagoda. Occasionally, when he was free, he would ponder over the item left by the sky demon, thinking about how to forge it into a magical treasure that he could use. When he heard that there were cultivators gathering there, he couldn't help but feel surprised. In the turbid ocean, there were storms every day, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled everywhere. In the eyes of cultivators, it was considered a dangerous place. It wasn't easy to have a foothold here. This made him curious, and he immediately ordered the flood dragon carriage to turn there. The two flood dragons had been traveling for a long time, and they looked listless. Hearing that there were cultivators there, they calculated in their hearts. Maybe they could recuperate for a few more days when they reached there. With this thought, they immediately became spirited and moved forward on the waves. After traveling for more than 300 miles, Zhang Chan rushed into the pavilion and reported, "Old master, it's right in front." Zhang Yan came out of the pagoda and stood in front of the platform, looking into the distance. He saw a huge piece of wood floating not far away from the ocean. With a rough look, it was actually more than 10 miles long. It seemed like it had been chopped down just now, its branches were complete, and its leaves were luxuriant. What was most peculiar was that there were pavilions, terraces, and pavilions on the branches, as well as bridges with springs and springs. There was even a peach blossom forest, and the little pink makeup was hidden among the tender branches and warm leaves. The green and red complemented each other, causing one to forget their worries. Zhang Yan's eyesight was extremely good, and he could see that there actually wasn't any restrictive formation here, and this huge piece of wood itself was a strange object. It was wrapped in spiritual light and shrouded in mist, and when the wind and waves on the ocean collided with the layer of mist, the violence was dispersed and calmed down. He couldn't help but praise, and said, "This is a paradise." He didn't hide his whereabouts when he came here, and at this moment, standing outside, he was naturally noticed by a young man and woman who were patrolling outside the huge piece of wood. Their gazes frequently sized up the two flood dragons, and it seemed like they were surprised that someone could control such fierce creatures. The two of them pointed at each other a few times, and the woman seemed to be eager to give it a try. She wanted to come up and greet them, but she was held back tightly by the man. After looking at them cautiously, he escaped into the huge piece of wood. Not long after, a Taoist walked out from inside. He had straight eyebrows and a straight nose, and his sideburns looked like they were cut by a knife. He wore a plain Taoist robe, and he looked refreshed and clean. He came in front of Zhang Yan, and his expression revealed some surprise. He took the initiative to come up and bow, and said, "An outsider has arrived, and I'm sorry for not welcoming you. May I know the reason for your visit?" Zhang Yan looked at this Taoist, and he was only in the first layer of the Yuanying realm, and his aura was a little off. He should have used some unorthodox method to enter this realm, but he didn't look down on him at all. For the other party to be able to survive in this muddy ocean, he was definitely not a simple person. He smiled and said, "I'm Zhang Yan. I'm traveling out at sea today, and I happened to pass by this place. I saw that there was actually a fellow Taoist in this desolate sea, so I came to visit. I hope I didn't disturb the owner of this place." When the Taoist heard that he was just passing by, he immediately relaxed, and said repeatedly, "I didn't disturb you, I didn't disturb you. Other than a few people from the same sect, I haven't had any guests for more than 100 years. Now that I see a fellow Taoist, I feel especially close." Zhang Yan smiled, and raised his hand, saying, "So you are the owner of this place, please forgive me for being impolite." The Taoist hurriedly returned the greeting, saying, "I don't dare. I'm Jin Huadu. I'm the palace master of this place, if you don't mind, please come and have a seat at my humble place." Zhang Yan said a few polite words, and then followed him to a tall pavilion in the giant tree. Perhaps it was because he hadn't seen anyone from the outside for a long time. After they sat down. After tea was served. Taoist Jin couldn't wait to ask about the situation on land. Seeing that the things he asked were all unimportant, Zhang Yan didn't hide anything, and so he roughly told him about the current situation in the East and West continents. When Taoist Jin heard that the East continent was currently facing a great calamity, he sighed repeatedly. He said, Fortunately, my ancestor had the foresight to not go east, but to establish a sect on the sea, avoiding the disputes of the earth calamity. Otherwise, we would have been dragged into it. Zhang Yan asked curiously, from what sect? Master Jin said, is your sect also a sect from the West Continent in the ancient times? Speaking of the origins of the palace master, Daoist Jin's face showed some pride. He said, back then, my palace master palace was also a large sect in the West Continent. Fellow Daoist has come from the Western Continent, so I presume you have also seen the broken spirits of that place. After the calamity, the ancestor of my Jin clan did not follow everyone to the Eastern Continent. Instead, he brought the disciples of the clan to this sea and established another clan here. Since then, it has been more than 10,000 years since then. Zhang Yan also nodded, saying, to be able to establish a sect in the middle of the sea, and pass down its legacy for 10,000 years, your ancestor must have been a person of great courage and wisdom. When Daoist Jin heard this, he seemed to have thought of something, and a look of shame appeared on his face. He sighed, it's a pity that the later generations are not up to expectations, wasting the ancestors' painstaking efforts. Zhang Yan was surprised, how so? Daoist Jin sighed and said, although my ancestor had the cultivation of a grotto heaven, he was a modest person. He thought that instead of going to the East Continent to fight with others, it would be better to establish a sect on the sea. However, no one in the same sect was willing to agree, thinking that the sea was not a good place to go. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. In all fairness, this was not nonsense. Cultivators were particular about Dharma companions, wealth, and location. It was inconvenient to travel with other sects on the sea, and the spiritual opportunity was not obvious. If there was no one with profound cultivation to oversee it, as time went by, it would naturally not be valued by others, and in the end, it could only become a secluded sect. It seemed that Chongyue True Temple had purposely provoked a fight with Donghua Mystic Sect, so as to train their disciples and preserve the sect's reputation. Another example was Tao Zhenren. He promised him 3 promises to repay the favor, but at the same time, it also made Clear Feather Sect and Zhaoyu Sect connected. Daoist Jin continued, after this incident, my ancestor made up his mind to create another continent outside of the 9 continents. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, with your ancestor's ability, it would not be difficult to move mountains and mountains, but I wonder how to gather spiritual opportunity. All the spiritual opportunity in the 9 continents came from the roots of the earth. It was not that there was no spiritual opportunity on the sea, but it was difficult to gather without mountains and rivers. Therefore, it was extremely scattered, and it was difficult to light up the spiritual point. If one were to cling to a place, after a long time, the spiritual opportunity would be exhausted. Daoist Jin smiled and said, back then, my ancestor once heard that a Vedanta from beyond the heavens had captured the northern underworld black turtle to guard the sect, and he was inspired. Coincidentally, there was a giant turtle in the middle of the sea, who knows how many tens of thousands of years old. When this creature stood on the bottom of the sea, it raised its head and breathed in the air of the wind and clouds. When it sleeps and wakes up, thousands of years would pass. If we could refine it into our sect's spiritual beast, it could suppress the land. Just the spiritual opportunity it would attract every day would be enough for a sect's cultivators. Zhang Yan thought for a while and understood the plan. Once such a giant creature refined its qi, the spiritual opportunity needed would be immeasurable. If hundreds of people used it to cultivate, it would not be a problem at all. At the same time, it could prevent the giant turtle from growing too big. He dared to say that if this could be done, not only would everyone benefit, the future generations would also benefit, and the leader would also use it to achieve Tao. He sighed in his heart. This ancestor's goal might not be limited to this. Once this precedent was set, it would definitely lead the future generations to follow suit, and in the future, they would be able to form another sect on the sea. After tens of thousands of years, they might not be weaker than the sects on the land. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 906. Zhang Yan couldn't help but think of himself when he saw the actions of this wise man. Going where no one has gone before, opening up places no one has opened up. Isn't the Tao I seek also the same? As he thought about it, he felt something in his heart. However, when he wanted to know more about it, the feeling disappeared. He thought about it calmly and knew that the opportunity had not yet arrived, so he did not force it. He turned his thoughts back and said, "Your honorable sect's ancestors' move was truly a good plan. If it succeeds, it will be praised by the later generations for tens of thousands of years." Taoist Jin smiled bitterly. "It's a pity that when my ancestor wanted to do this, an enemy came knocking on his door." After a tough battle, he managed to repel the enemy, but he was injured and could only rest in the palace. It was not until a few hundred years later, before he was reincarnated, that he hurriedly went to the door and injured the giant turtle. Before he left, he ordered his disciples to fulfill this wish. He sighed that after tens of thousands of years, no one from the younger generation could cultivate to the level of my ancestor. "I'm ashamed to face my ancestors." Zhang Yan shook his head. Just now, he could see that this spiritual opportunity was borrowed from the giant tree under his feet. It was more than enough to support Jinren Yuanying, but it was impossible to get someone from the heavenly abode. Without such a cultivator, it would not be easy to subdue the giant turtle. But then again, if the younger generation of the Palace of Revelation really wanted to fulfill the ancestors' wish, they might have found a way. But the problem was with the giant tree under their feet. With a way out, the cultivators were content with the status quo and would not fight to the death. He shook his head and asked, "Palace Master Jin, I see that the giant tree under your feet is very strange. Can you tell me where it came from?" Taoist Jin hurriedly said, "There's nothing inconvenient about it. My ancestor used a treasure to exchange for this tree with a cultivator from beyond the heavens. It was said that it was plucked from a divine tree called Dachuan. Don't look at the giant tree now. When it fell into my ancestor's hands, it was only a leaf. After tens of thousands of years, it has grown to this size." After he finished, his expression changed slightly and he called for a servant girl beside him. He said, "Take my golden axe. Go get a tall branch." The maidservant obeyed and left. In less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, she returned with a jade plate in her hand. On the plate was a green branch. The branches and leaves were strong and healthy. It was full of vitality. Taoist Jin ordered him to bring the jade plate to Zhang Yan. He cupped his fists and said, "It is fate that we meet. My illumination palace is isolated from the world and has nothing good in it. Only this divine wood is presentable, so I'll give it to you." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then took out a jade box from his sleeve, placed it on the table, and said with a smile, "It is impolite not to reciprocate. My master is an expert in alchemy, and this is a treasure pill that he personally refined. There are more than 1,000 pills of various sizes, each with their own unique effects. Today, I will give it to you." Hearing this, Taoist Jin's eyes lit up. He inherited the lineage of ancient cultivators, so he had many methods to consume pills to increase his cultivation. However, even though there were many treasures on the sea, because most of the pill recipes required plants on land, there were very few that could be used by his own sect. Even if he managed to refine them, their medicinal effects were limited. Now that he had these pills, there was hope for his sect's disciples who had stagnated in their cultivation to advance. He cupped his fists and said, "I will accept your generous gift, Taoist." He felt that he had gained a great advantage this time, so he added, "Do you have anything you need? I will do my best to gather it." Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony and said with a smile, "Your sect traces its origins back to an ancient sect. Do you have any erosion inscriptions?" Hearing his request, Taoist Jin relaxed and said with a smile, "So Taoist Jin is fond of this Tao. That's easy. My illumination palace has many erosion inscriptions left behind by our ancestors. I will order someone to fetch them for you." He immediately gave the order. Not long after, a strong man came in with a large jar. Taoist Jin waved his hand and dismissed him. He stepped forward and opened the lid of the jar. Pointing at the jade scrolls inside, he said, "Are you satisfied, Taoist Jin?" Zhang Yan took a look and said in surprise, "There are so many." Taoist Jin said proudly, these erosion inscriptions were brought out by our ancestors from the sect's treasury. Some were even written by our ancestors. Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn. He cupped his fists and said, "This is too much." Taoist Jin shook his head and said, "The Tao of erosion inscriptions also requires talent. There is no one in our sect who is skilled in this Tao. Leaving them in my place would only be gathering dust. I might as well give them to you." Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and put them away. Seeing that he accepted them, Taoist Jin put the medicinal pills into his sleeve. Both of them got what they needed and were happy. Taoist Jin said, "Since Taoist Jin's master is a Tao pill grandmaster, he must be well versed in this Tao. Why don't you stay with me for a few more days? I would like to learn more from you." Zhang Yan said, "I'm afraid I can't stay for long. I still have a mission from my sect. In a few days, once my mount recovers, I will leave." Taoist Jin thought about it and asked, looking at the direction Taoist Jin is going, "Are you going to the Donglai continent?" Zhang Yan said, "Yes." "Have you been there before, Taoist Jin?" Taoist Jin shook his head and said, "As the master of a palace, I cannot leave this place without permission. However, when my first junior brother went out to collect rare treasures over 100 years ago, he accidentally came across this continent. At that time, he heard a disciple calling out to him from behind, so he went back to receive him. But when he looked back, all he saw was the vast ocean and no trace of the celestial mountain." Zhang Yan smiled slightly. The Donglai continent was independent of the 8 continents. In ancient times, there were many rumors that it was a celestial mountain from beyond the seas. Because it drifted, sometimes hidden, sometimes small. Since ancient times, very few people had been able to reach it, and there were very few records of it. To find this continent, apart from waiting for a special time, some other methods were needed. For those who did not know the reason, they could only enter this place by chance. Taoist Jin looked at his expression and had a thought. He thought to himself, could it be that Taoist Zhang knows how to enter this continent? If so, there might be a chance to find the item that Grandmaster left in this continent. Thinking of this, his heart warmed. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist Jin, I have a presumptuous request." Zhang Yan said, "Please speak, Taoist Jin." Taoist Jin said, "Due to the rules of the sect, it is difficult for me to leave this place. However, my lifespan is close to 800 years, and I do not have much time left. However, my disciples are trapped here and do not know how big the world is. It is a pity. Since Taoist Jin is going to Donglai, could you bring a few people with you?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "That is possible, but I have to say in advance that because of my master's orders, it is difficult for me to take care of your disciples. Please do not take offense." Taoist Jin hurriedly said, "How would I dare to ask Taoist Jin to take care of them? Just bring them to the Donglai continent, there is no need to pay attention to them when they come down." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "In that case, it is not difficult." Taoist Jin was delighted and ordered the servant beside him, "Go get Zi Kang, Zi Xiang, and junior brother Lu." The servant bowed and turned to leave. Not long after, 3 people arrived at the guest hall. The one in front was a middle-aged Taoist with dark skin and a short stature. His eyes were bright, and behind him were 2 young disciples. The one on the left was wearing a golden crown and a beautiful robe, with a jade belt around his waist. He had a jade face and red lips, and he had an imposing appearance. The one on the right was unprepossessing and wore a coarse shirt, like a servant being ordered around. Taoist Jin pointed at the middle-aged Taoist and said, "This is my junior brother Lu." Back then, he was the one who encountered the Donglai continent. Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Ah, so it is Taoist Lu." Taoist Lu hurriedly returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, Jinren." At this moment, Taoist Jin shouted at the 2 disciples, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and greet Jinren Zhang." The 2 of them came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He gently lifted his sleeve, and 2 spiritual lights flew out and landed in the hands of the 2. He said, These are talismans refined by eye. In times of danger, they can protect one's life. The two of them hurriedly thanked him. Taoist Jin said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you think of these two juniors of mine?" Zhang Yan glanced at them. The Golden Crown disciple had cultivated for at most more than 60 years and had already cultivated to the core transformation realm. It was already very rare to find such a person in a place where spiritual opportunity was scattered on the sea. As for the other disciple with a plain appearance, purely in terms of talent, he was actually a level higher than the Golden Crown disciple. However, he could tell at a glance that the latter had never received any excellent cultivation technique and was much weaker in terms of cultivation. Moreover, from the way he dressed, he must have a despicable status. Thus, he did not expose him and only said, "They both have excellent talent." Taoist Jin stood up and bowed. He said, "Today, I would like to ask fellow Taoist to bring the three of them with you to Donglai." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since I've already promised fellow Taoist, of course I'll carry it out. However, are you really willing to send such excellent disciples away?" Taoist Jin said seriously, "If you don't think about it, you won't amount to much." Zhang Yan smiled. He could see that there must be other reasons behind this, and it was not as simple as he made it out to be. However, this had nothing to do with him, so he did not delve into it. The few of them chatted for a long time. Seeing that it was getting late, Taoist Jin pulled Zhang Yan along to watch the dance and music. Taoist Lu and the two disciples also accompanied them, and only left at the end of the hour. The three of them came out of the palace. The Golden Crown disciple suddenly said, "Uncle Master, Master has said many times that Uncle Master is very knowledgeable. What do you think of this Shinran's cultivation? How does he compare to Master?" Taoist Lu was very honest and did not plan to save face for his senior brother at all. He sneered and said, "Senior brother's cultivation is still far from his." The Golden Crown disciple said in shock, "Could it be that he's already in the second stage?" The Taoist curled his lips and said, "What's the big deal about the second stage? I've already said that you should go out and walk around. You're always looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. The high cloud above Jinren Zhang's head is gone and his qi dynamic is smooth. One look and you can tell that he has already condensed his Dharmakaya. If he takes another step forward, he will have the same attainments as the founding master." Hearing that Zhang Yan was so powerful, the Golden Crown disciple was greatly shocked. He said uneasily, "If this person has evil intentions, wouldn't our Illumination Palace be in great danger?" Taoist Lu said disapprovingly, "It's obvious that he's from the Xianmen orthodox path. To be able to cultivate to such a level, he must be from a large sect. Why would he covet our Illumination Palace's wealth?" There was one thing he did not say. If the Illumination Palace did not even have the means to protect itself, how would it have dared to invite them in? Hearing the conversation between the two, the expression of the disciple who had been silently walking behind them couldn't help but change. He clenched his fists as if he had made up his mind about something. Chapter 907. As soon as Zhang Yan returned from the banquet, he stayed in the guest house for the night. In order to express his goodwill, Taoist Jin ordered his people to deliver a lot of good things to him. Zhang Chan looked at the rare treasures on the table and clicked his tongue, picking one up and fiddling with it from time to time. Even though he was an insect, he'd gained a great deal of knowledge while following by Zhang Yan's side, and his horizons could barely be considered to be broad. However, most of the treasures here were from the sea, and there were many that he'd never heard of or seen before, so he couldn't help but feel that it was extremely novel. At Zhang Yan's cultivation, he didn't care about these strange things, so he naturally allowed Zhang Yan to play with them. He glanced to the side and saw that the person who delivered the treasures was the young cultivator in plain clothes he saw in Daytime Hall. He asked in a pleasant tone, "I heard fellow Taoist Jin mention your names during the day. One is Zikang, and the other is Zixiang. Which one are you?" The young cultivator bowed and said, "Thank you for asking. I am Jin Zixiang, and Jin Zikang is my clan brother." After the ceremony, he took 2 steps forward and took out a wooden plate from his sleeve. There were 2 green and tender fruits on the plate. They were plump and moist, making people salivate with just a glance. He held it up high and said, "Taoist master, these are green fruits that grew on the divine tree in my palace. Don't underestimate the size of the divine tree, but this fruit only grows once every 1,000 years. When we cultivators eat it, our vision will improve and our lifespan will increase by 100 years. It was specially ordered by the palace lord to pick it and give it to Taoist master." When Zhang Yan saw that the other party had given him 2 of these rare items, it was clear that this trip was very important to him. He nodded and said, "Please thank fellow Taoist Jin on my behalf when we return." At this time, Zhang Chan picked up a golden conch from the table and asked, "Fellow Taoist, what's your name? Do you know what this thing is used for?" Jin Zixiang turned his head to take a look and said with a smile, "This thing is called Human Desire Law Conch. When you blow on it, it can release 5-colored mist. When you are inside, whatever you wish for will come true. That's why it has another name, Wish Comes True. Within 100 steps. It can charm people into that illusion, and it's impossible to guard against it." Zhang Chan's eyes lit up. "This is an interesting object. Let me try." He puffed out his cheeks. He blew out a breath. Sure enough, a wisp of colorful mist flew out. It enveloped his body. After about a quarter of an hour, he dispersed the fog around him. Smacking his lips twice, he touched his still shriveled belly and said, "Although it's delicious, it's a pity that it's all a dream. Still, it's not bad to use it to relieve boredom." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since you like it, then take it." Zhang Chan grinned and said, "Thank you, master." As he spoke, he kept it in his bosom. Jin Zixiang looked at him as if nothing had happened. He looked calm on the surface, but he was very surprised in his heart. This human desire conch was not as simple as he made it out to be. Because the Illumination Palace was located on the ocean, it was cut off from the rest of the world. Most of what the disciples knew about the outside world came from ancient books. Although it lacked the tumult of the mortal world, and their minds were mostly clear, it also lacked experience. This object was used by the cultivators in the palace to train their Tao heart. In the past, when disciples of the same sect entered the illusion, no matter how skilled they were, they would still be confused by the illusion. After the spell was dispelled, the master would have to find a way to stabilize their state of mind. This would take at least a few days, and at most a year and a half, before they could stabilize their mind. But he didn't think that after this experience, Zhang Chan was as if nothing had happened. He thought to himself, "I didn't think that even a child by Jinren Zhang's side would be so amazing." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and a flaming flag floated in front of him. He said, "Although this flag isn't a magical treasure, it was personally refined by me. With a thought, I can set up a restrictive array around you. Now, I'll give it to you for protection." Jin Zixiang didn't accept the flag. After a moment of silence, he knelt down with a thud and kowtowed. He said, "I beg Jinren to let me stay." Zhang Yan's gaze shifted downwards. He said calmly, "I've already agreed to bring you there. What's the point of asking? Unless palace head Jin has changed to someone else." Jin Zixiang shook his head. "I have no intention of going to the Donglai continent. I only wish to be by your side in the future." Zhang Yan said plainly, "You are a disciple of the Illumination Palace. Even if you don't have a master, I have no intention of accepting a disciple." Jin Zixiang was currently buried in the ground. Upon hearing this, his body trembled. He said bitterly, "I know this is an unreasonable request. I don't dare to hope for superior martial arts. I only hope that when Jinren leaves Donglai, you can bring me along." Zhang Yan understood what he meant. He frowned and said, "You want to leave the Illumination Palace?" Jin Zixiang said, "I don't want to be a traitor to my master. It's just that the Illumination Palace has a rule. Once a disciple of the branch reaches the core transformation realm, if he wishes to continue his cultivation, he can no longer stay in the palace. He has to leave and establish his own sect. Since I have to leave sooner or later, I've decided to repay the kindness of raising and teaching me. But the world is so big, and I don't know where to go. I'd like to follow you for a few days. Zhang Yan said, I've told fellow Jin before that I have orders from my sect. I don't know when I'll be able to leave. If it takes a long time, it might take hundreds of years. Are you still willing to follow me? Jin Zixiang was startled. He thought, even though my cultivation is low, my lifespan is not more than 100 years. Once I reach Donglai, even if it's difficult to become a disciple of Jinren, I can still go around and find a good master. He kowtowed again and said, I'm willing. Zhang Yan continued, I see that your desire to cultivate is very difficult, but I want to ask you, are you seeking longevity or seeking the true path? Jin Zixiang raised his head and replied seriously, I've made up my mind to use my entire life to fulfill my ancestors' wish. I hate that I'm not a direct descendant, so it's difficult for me to obtain the true path. That's why I'm eager to leave this world and find superior martial arts. Zhang Yan nodded and sighed. The direct descendant possessed superior martial arts, but could only sigh and sigh, not willing to take the risk. On the other hand, the branch had high aspirations and wanted to pull themselves together, but there was no way forward. He thought for a moment, then looked over and said, it's a pity that the senior's wish cannot be fulfilled. So, I'll grant you your request. Jin Zixiang was overcome with emotion. He knocked his forehead on the ground and said, Jinren's kindness is something that I can't repay even if I die 10,000 times. Zhang Yan said, there's no need to repay me. Just remember what you've said today. Zhang Yan stayed at the Illumination Palace for about 10 days. When he saw that the twin dragons had recovered, he bid farewell to Taoist Jin. On the second day, when they were about to depart, Taoist Jin personally led over 100 disciples to send them off. Taoist Lu looked at the dragon carriage in the sky and said to Jin Zikang and Jin Zixiang, it's hard to say when we'll be back. If you have anything to say, go ahead and say it. Jin Zixiang walked over to Taoist Jin, knelt down and respectfully kowtowed 3 times. Taoist Jin had already received Zhang Yan's greeting and knew his choice. He sighed and helped him up. He said gently, Zixiang, although I'm the head of a school, I can only follow the rules set by my ancestors. I hope you won't hate me. In the future, follow Jinren Zhang well. One day, I hope to see the wishes of my ancestors come true. Jin Zixiang remembered that Taoist Jin had raised him since he was young. Other than the fact that Taoist Jin had never taught him superior techniques, he treated him like his own son. Now that they were about to depart, all the memories flashed before his eyes. He couldn't help but say in a trembling voice, Uncle, please forgive me for not being filial. On the other hand, Jin Zikang's hand was held by a beautiful woman. The woman was sobbing as if she couldn't bear to let him go. Jin Zikang said impatiently, I'm only going to gain experience. It's not a life and death separation. Mother, why do you have to be like this? Outsiders will laugh at us. The beautiful woman stopped crying and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. She turned to Jin Zixiang and said, Zixiang, you have to look after your brother. Don't let him suffer. Jin Zixiang cupped his fists calmly and said, as long as I'm here, I will do my best to protect my brother. Jin Zikang laughed and said, 11th brother, your skills are not as good as mine. Just take care of yourself when the time comes. Taoist Jin said, all right, don't keep Taoist Zhang waiting for too long. Let's go. Zikang, listen to your uncle Master Lu and don't force yourself. Jin Zikang said, I understand. The woman looked at the 3 of them going up the tower. Thinking about it, she still felt sad. She complained, Master, you're doing this on a whim. You can't live peacefully in the palace, but you want Zikang to go out and gain experience. Who knows when he'll come back? Taoist Jin frowned and said, what do you know? The Donglai continent has our sect's treasure. It's left behind by our founder. It's just that we can't enter it. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity, how will we get another chance in the future? The woman muttered, why ask Zikang to go? Can't we just ask Lu Qianyuan to go? He's already someone who signed a blood pact. Are we still afraid of him playing tricks? Taoist Jean was annoyed and scolded, I have my own plans. Don't you dare say anything else. Seeing his stern expression, the woman did not dare to say anything else. At the same time, 100 miles away from the Illumination Palace, there was a cloud of mist floating on the ocean. Within it was a large whale, and on its back was a hut. Two Taoists were playing a game of chess. One of the scholars in white tossed the chess piece in his hand. Channeling his mana, he looked into the sky and said, I think the owner of the dragon carriage is the one going to Donglai. The other person wore a hemp robe and a bamboo hat. His face looked weathered. He also looked up and said, of course. The scholar in white chuckled and said, back then, there were many disciples under our founder, but all the benefits went to the Jean family. This ancestral treasure belongs to you. The Taoist in hemp said in a low voice, Lu Qianyuan is not difficult to deal with. It's just that Taoist Zhang seems to be a third-degree cultivator. He's not someone to be trifled with. The scholar in white agreed, that's right. This kind of person cannot be offended unless it's absolutely necessary. Once he brings Lu Qianyuan and the other two into the Donglai continent and separate, it won't be too late for us to find him then. At this moment, a rumble came from the sky. He looked again and saw that the dragon carriage had broken through the high cloud and was heading to the extreme heaven. The two of them looked at each other and did not speak. They immediately joined hands to cast their spells. After a short while, the hut under their feet suddenly flew up and also pierced through the clouds. When they reached the high cloud at the same time, they saw that the dragon carriage was already far away. The scholar exclaimed, I didn't expect it to be so fast. If I didn't bring the finger chi fragrance, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to catch up. The Taoist in hemp said, enough with the idle chatter. Quickly light the treasure incense. The scholar in white smiled and said, Senior apprentice brother, don't be hasty. He unhurriedly took out a large stick of incense from his bosom. With a slight turn of his hand, a plume of white smoke flew out. However, it did not go up into the sky. Instead, it turned into a thin thread and shot towards the southeast. The direction it pointed towards was the direction of the dragon carriage. Chapter 908. After the flood dragon carriage left the Illumination Palace, it continued to float on the sea for more than a year. On this day, Zhang Chan walked into the alchemy room and bowed. Master, the two dragons are complaining that they are tired. They won't leave no matter what. May I ask if we can let them go down to hunt for food? Zhang Yan smiled. I'm afraid that the two of them are injured from traveling in the storm. Pass on my words. Let them go down and eat their fill for a month. Zhang Chan acknowledged and went down to pass on the order. The two dragons' favorite food was mostly monsters in the sea. However, the ocean was vast, and most of their time was spent looking for food. In the past 10 days, they could barely fill their stomachs. Now that they heard that they could finally eat their fill after a month, they were overjoyed. In an instant, they broke free from the reins and rushed down from the clouds into the waves. Zhang Chan snorted. He felt that the two dragons were wild and unruly. They needed to be controlled, so he couldn't be nice to them. He returned to the alchemy room and suggested, Master, in my humble opinion, should we be more lenient with the two dragons? Zhang Yan smiled. I have my reasons. Zhang Chan didn't understand at first, but then he realized that the journey was coming to an end and they were about to reach Donglai. Right at this moment, the sound of waves crashing against each other suddenly came from below, followed by the furious roars of the two dragons. Occasionally, there were one or two howls of unknown monsters mixed in, extremely ear-piercing. He paused, then chuckled. Those two brothers must be blind. They must have run into some troublesome opponent again. The two dragons were proud of their bravery. When they went out in search of food, there were a few times when they forcefully snatched food from the mouths of other beasts. Along the way, they had fought with the beasts no less than 14 or 15 times. Judging by the commotion, they must have run into some kind of powerful water monster. The people of the Illumination Palace who lived in the lower levels of the pagoda also heard the commotion. The journey on the sea was boring. Priest Lu was fine. He was already a Yuanying cultivator and had a profound cultivation base. A year's time was nothing to him. On the other hand, Jin Kong was different. Even though he'd entered the Tao for a few decades, his temperament was still impetuous. When he heard this sound, he immediately knew what was going on, so he used the excuse of watching the battle as an excuse to run out. Taoist Lu shook his head. Seeing that Jin Xiang was still sitting in the same place, he asked with concern, "Xiang, why don't you go?" Jin Xiang respectfully replied, "I feel that my skills are not sufficient and I need more time to cultivate. I'm afraid I won't have the time to do other things." Taoist Lu looked at him a few times and said, "I know you have to work hard and have perseverance, but you don't have to sit around all day. For us cultivators, cultivation is important, but we also need to broaden our horizons and broaden our knowledge. For example, if we meet such a strong enemy in the future, we will know how to deal with it." Moreover, the two Taoist Jiao cultivators have high cultivation. It is a rare sight to see them fight with the Sea tribe. You missed it the last few times, so chances will be rare in the future. Jin Xiang understood. He stood up and sincerely said, "Thank you for your advice, Uncle Master." Taoist Lu stood up and said with a smile, "Come with me." The two of them went outside and saw a strange fish about 10 feet long among the waves. Its head was like a dolphin, and its tail was like a sparrow. There was a row of fins on its back, and both sides of the fins were spread out like wings. What was even more strange was that there was a pair of sharp claws on its abdomen. If one did not look carefully, they would not notice it. The two Jiao dragons were stepping on clouds, circling around the fish and biting it. From time to time, they would tear off a piece of scale from its opponent. Blood splattered, and the sea was filled with the smell of blood. That fish monster was extremely ferocious. Suddenly encountering a great enemy, not only did it not hide in the sea, but it flopped and leaped on the surface of the water. Its two fins flapped and created huge waves and strong gales, creating a hua-hua sound. It actually caused the pagoda in the sky to shake. Jin Kang's expression changed. "Uncle Master, what is this?" Taoist Lu thought for a while and said, "There are many strange things in the sea. I don't know what this is." At this moment, Zhang Chan's voice came from above, "Sir, Master invites you to come up." Taoist Lu was worried that the strange fish was too strong. If they encountered a dangerous situation later, he might not be able to protect his two nephews. When he heard Zhang Yan's invitation, he was relieved and thanked him. He then swept his sleeves and brought the two up to the top of the pagoda. Zhang Yan had already left the alchemy room and was standing in front of the jade railing. When he saw them coming up, he said, "Please come here." Taoist Lu cupped his hands and brought the two to his side. Jin Kong looked down and couldn't help but ask the question in his heart. He turned around and asked, "Jinren, what is this?" Zhang Yan smiled, "This demon has a common name, fishbird life, or birdfish life. In fact, it is a demon bird that has cultivated for thousands of years and has yet to transform. After eating a demon fish, its vital energy resonates with the vital energy in its stomach, and then it transforms into this kind of creature. This ferocious monster has the best of both. It is born as a fish, then becomes a bird, and then it gains the form of a bird and a bird. The one in front of us has wet scales like feathers, bright and flamboyant, and can also control the wind and qi. It must be more than 1,000 years old." Taoist Lu praised sincerely, "Although I was born in the sea, I am not as knowledgeable as you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is a strange species of the Donglai continent. It is not strange that you do not know about it. Even I only knew about it because of my ancestors' notes." Taoist Lu was surprised, "A strange species of the Donglai continent? Fellow Taoist, could it be that we're about to reach our destination?" When Jin Kong and Jin Xiang heard this, they could not care less about the fierce battle on the sea, and looked over with anticipation. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "We are almost there, but before we enter the continent, there are a few things I have to say to you." Taoist Lu solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Please speak, my friend." Zhang Yan said, Legend has it that the Donglai continent was originally a fallen star, and later became a celestial mountain in the sea. It was also set up by a powerful person, so it is hard to find. Our ancestors speculated that it is between the real world and the real world. It will only appear in a few special places on certain days. When the time comes, we only need to rush to that place and we will be able to obtain the opportunity to enter. The Donglai continent only appeared once every 9 years. He had read the writings of his ancestors and knew that it would appear in 5 places. 2 of them were in the 9th heaven, and the other was in the underground abyss. He could not go to either of them right now. Fortunately, the other places were above the sea, so it was not difficult to find. The direction that the dragon carriage was heading in was one of them. Taoist Lu suddenly understood and said, "I see." No wonder Taoist couldn't find it. Zhang Yan asked, "I heard that Taoist Lu almost entered the continent." Taoist Lu sighed and said, "Yes. It was a pity that time. I was going out to sea alone, but when I saw this celestial mountain, I was excited. Behind me, I heard my disciple crying for help. When I looked back, I realized that it was just an illusion. When I turned back to look, the huge continent had disappeared without a trace." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "That's because there's a forbidden formation outside the Donglai continent. This formation isn't used to harm people, but to create all sorts of illusions. They're so minute that it's hard to tell what's real and what's fake. Even cultivators will unknowingly be controlled by it." Taoist Lu was trapped in one of them, which is called the turning back restriction. When you encounter this restriction, it is easy to deal with. No matter what happens behind you, whether it is a low laugh or a call from your loved ones, you cannot turn back. Even if you feel someone blowing on the back of your neck, you cannot pay attention to it. Otherwise, you will never find the continent again. When Jin Kong heard this, he felt a little itchy on the back of his neck and unconsciously moved his shoulders. Taoist Lu, however, widened his eyes and said, "So, there is more than one type of restriction." Zhang Yan said, "This restriction is very strange. It varies from person to person, and all of them are aimed at the weak points of a person's heart. For example, there's a restriction called silence restriction, which requires the person to not open their mouth to speak. Once they do, they will immediately be barred from entering the continent." Jin Xiang spoke at this moment. "Not speaking for a year doesn't seem to be a difficult thing for us Taoists." Taoist Lu, on the other hand, had a deep understanding. He shook his head and said, "That is because you are introverted. Some people are lively and difficult to restrict. If you do not let them speak, it will be more painful than killing them." Jin Kong said, "There is the silence restriction. Could it be that there is also the silence restriction?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Whether there is or not, I don't know either. But I'm quite lucky to have encountered these. There's a senior in my sect who once went there to investigate, and he didn't encounter anything strange. He just looked at the Donglai continent, and it took him more than 50 years to get there." Taoist Lu's expression turned solemn and said, "This. Jinren, may I ask if this is an illusion or reality?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Illusion is also reality, and reality is also illusion." Taoist Lu nodded slightly and did not say anything. The restriction formation was aimed at the weakness of the human heart. Only by overcoming the difficulties in the heart could one pass through. From this point of view, reality and reality were the same. Zhang Yan looked at everyone, and his gaze lingered on Jin Xiang for a while longer. He said slowly, "There is a saying, it is easy to avoid the mortal tribulation, but difficult to pass through the heart. I am only guiding you. As for whether or not you can pass through, it is up to you. Outsiders cannot help you." Jin Kong was puzzled and said, "Then why didn't Jinren bring it forward? At least we can be on guard." Taoist Lu scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. I am afraid that you will be stuck in it for too long and will not be able to get rid of the heart barrier." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Only those with extremely firm Tao hearts would be able to act as if they didn't see it, and act as if they didn't hear it. It isn't a good thing for people like you to know about it in advance, and it will only cause you to be entangled in it and sink deeper and deeper into it. At this point, he looked at the ocean for a while and said, "This demon is about to be defeated. I still have something to do, so I will return to the pavilion first." Everyone hurriedly bowed and sent him off. When they turned around, they suddenly saw a hut in the clouds. Taoist Lu could not help but frown. Walking on the sky sea, the view was wide and the horizon was wide. Even if the two parties were miles apart, it was not difficult to see each other. In the beginning, the hut was still somewhat concealed. Later on, when they realized that no one came to check on them, they no longer hid. In the past month, because they had encountered quite a few thunderclouds and storms along the way, they followed them even more closely. Jean Kong looked at the place with hostility and said, "Uncle, it is those two again. They must be after the Grand Master's treasure. Are we just going to let them follow us? Why don't we inform Jinren Zhang and let him deal with them?" Taoist Lu shook his head and said, "Jinren Zhang's cultivation is profound, how would he not know? Just now, he is leaving on purpose. He does not want to be involved in this matter. Let them be. If they don't know the key, even if they follow us, they may not be able to enter Donglai continent." Chapter 909. After Zhang Yan left the three people of Illumination Palace behind and returned to the pagoda, the battle in the sea quickly came to an end. Although Niao Xing could be considered a natural variant, he was still not a match for the two flood dragons. In the beginning, he relied on his ferocious nature and was able to fight evenly with them, but the more he fought, the weaker he became, and the thought of retreating appeared in his mind. With a shake of his body, he shook the water and forced the two dragons back a little. Then, he spread his fins and hissed threateningly before lowering his body and retreating into the water. The reason why the two flood dragons had been wandering around and fighting before was to exhaust its vitality and energy. Now that their plan had succeeded, they obviously wouldn't let it go so easily. However, they also knew that a cornered dog would do something desperate, so they didn't plan to immediately kill it. One of the dragons shouted, "Brother, this big guy is enough for us to eat for a few days. Let him escape for a while and let out some blood along the way. When the time comes, we can make our move. This will save us a lot of energy." The other dragon waved its tail and disagreed, "What a pity. Just now, we've already let out a lot of blood. If we let out more, we won't be able to drink a few bowls of blood soup. If I knew this big guy was so useless, I would have taken him down just now." The first dragon scolded, "Useless thing. Shinren, you let us wait for a month. With our abilities, do you think we won't be able to find food? Hurry up and get me down there, don't let him get away." The two dragons made a ruckus and rushed into the sea in pursuit. About an hour later, a large pool of blood spread out on the surface of the sea. With another loud bang, the two flood dragons broke out of the water with the corpse in their claws. Then, they began to tear the corpse apart in midair. This scene shocked the three people of Illumination Palace who were watching from the outside. Jin Zikong murmured, "Luckily, there have never been dragons like this around my palace. Otherwise, I don't know how to defend myself." Taoist Lu chuckled and patted him on the shoulder, saying, "These two Taoist Jiao are more than that. Nephew, you have underestimated the Illumination Palace. The Palace Lord and I are limited by our natural endowments, and we are unable to cultivate many of our cultivation methods to a high level. Even so, what we have now is enough to protect the sect." Jin Zikong suddenly asked, "Uncle, I don't know which one is stronger than the sect behind Jinren Zhang." Lu Daoist frowned. He felt troubled. After 10,000 years, the Illumination Palace had long since become lifeless. The reason why they were able to continue was because they relied on the strength of the direct bloodline in the sect. The branch bloodlines were unable to surpass them. The sect was located overseas. There were no powerful enemies around. He had heard from Zhang Yan that the sect behind him was also a major sect in the Donghua continent. That was someone who could stand out from the other sects and establish a foothold in the world. How could his own family compare? Just now, those words were only to boost their morale. However, it was not appropriate for him to lie, so he avoided it and said, "Our sect is an ancient Xianmen. Our cultivation methods are not weaker than any other sect in the world." Then, he changed the topic and said, "There is no point in telling you all this now. In the future, when your cultivation reaches a certain level, you will naturally understand." After waiting on the sea for a month, the two Jiao finally recovered their vitality, and the group continued their journey. After flying east for a few days, Zhang Yan figured that they were not far from the border of the continent. He ordered the Jiao carriage to descend from the high cloud and travel on the sea. That day, at noon, he ordered the carriage to stop. He used his mana and silently sensed the surroundings. Although the spiritual opportunity on the sea was scattered, there were still traces to follow. Moreover, each had its own path, and there was no single place that was the same. The place beneath his feet was already very close to what that senior had said, but the details seemed to be right, but they weren't. He pinched his fingers and calculated, then looked around and said, "Although the spiritual opportunity is not the same as what was written in the records, but this location should be the same. Those slight differences should be due to the movement of the spiritual opportunity over the past thousands of years." After thinking about it, this was just his own guess, and the real situation might not be like this. To be safe, he had to check the surroundings more. Thinking about this, he ordered the Jiao carriage to move again. This time, it took another 3 to 4 days, and he did find a few suspicious locations. The Donglai continent revealed a corner of the door, and the time it stopped was not fixed. It could be a few hours, or a few days, the length was uncertain, and there was no way to figure out the pattern. As for whether there were other situations, no one could completely understand it. He was not willing to pin the opportunity to enter the continent on luck. Otherwise, if he missed it, he could only go to the next location. It was just that these few places were quite far apart. With his speed, it was not easy to travel all the way in a few hours. Fortunately, he had his own solution. He brought Zhang Chan closer and asked, "Have you memorized all the places we passed through in front of us?" Zhang Chan said, "I have memorized them." Zhang Yan said, "Split out a few groups of insect soldiers and wait in those places. If there is any movement, quickly come and inform me." Zhang Chan said, "Don't worry, master. I will definitely keep it in mind, and I won't make any mistakes." Zhang Yan waved his hand and ordered him to make the arrangements. In this way, there would be insect soldiers watching at all times. Even if his previous guess was wrong, he would be able to rush over in time. After thinking about it carefully and making sure that there was nothing left out, he put the matter aside. Another 5 or 6 days passed, and everything was set up properly. Zhang Yan felt that there was nothing left out, so he found the 3 people from the Illumination Palace and said, "In less than half a month, the Donglai continent will appear above this sea region. However, once it gets close to the array outside the mountain, it will enter the heart barrier. I am indebted to Daoist Jin, but I don't want to see you make any mistakes that might endanger your lives. I will do my best to protect you, but there are many barriers that cannot be broken with mana. When the time comes, you will have to be more careful." Daoist Lu thought about it for a while, then cupped his hands and said, "The 3 of us are already grateful that you brought us here. We don't dare to ask for more." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The 3 of you don't have to think too much for the next few days. Cleanse your qi and clear your mind, calm the void, and clear your mind so that you won't be taken advantage of by external forces." Daoist Lu knew that he was right. After thanking him and seeing that there was nothing else, he did not stay any longer and led the 3 away. Outside, he said to his 2 nephews, "The heart barrier cannot be overestimated, nor can it be underestimated. Now that we know the way to enter the continent, there is no need to rush. The 2 of you are still young, so you won't have a chance this time. Next time, you can try your luck again. Do not be presumptuous and force your way through." His tone suddenly became stern, a complete change from his previous lazy and unruly attitude. Jin Zikang and Jin Zixiang both agreed. More than 10 days passed as the crowd waited. On the 13th day, Zhang Yan suddenly felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart. He waved his sleeves and walked out of the pavilion. The wind and waves that never stopped around him had unknowingly stopped. A bright moon rose. Not far away, there was a celestial mountain floating on the sea. The mirror sea was far away. Wrapped in snow and mist, the mountain was tall and beautiful, like a goddess descending to the mortal world. The three people from the Illumination Palace did as they were told. When he hurried up to the pavilion, he was instantly attracted by the miraculous scene on the sea. After a moment of absent-mindedness, Jin Zikang said excitedly, "Is that the Donglai continent?" Taoist Lu took a few glances and shook his head. No, no. Jin Zikang was stunned. What's wrong? Zhang Yan smiled and turned around. He pointed behind the three of them and said, "All of you, look over there." The three of them turned around and were stunned. They found that there was also an illusion of a mountain, but it was hidden in the thick fog and not a trace of moonlight could reach it. Taoist Lu looked at it attentively and finally seemed relieved. He said, "It should be here." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before passing the mental barrier, there are still two barriers to pass. This is the first barrier, the void boundary barrier. If the person who comes is deceived by this illusory image and follows it, then they will be going in the wrong direction and will miss the opportunity to enter the continent." This barrier was not difficult to pass. There was no sign of life in the illusion. On the contrary, if one went to the real place and observed carefully, they would find spiritual chi fluctuating. When a cultivator came here, as long as he was calm and not distracted by the beautiful scenery, he would be able to distinguish the real from the fake. In fact, in the ancient book, this barrier was only mentioned in one sentence. It was obvious that the person who wrote it did not take it seriously. In his opinion, when a cultivator cultivated to the point where he could come to the Donglai continent, there was no need to say much about this. On the contrary, if he went over, he might as well turn back as soon as possible to avoid losing his life. Jin Zikang said with a sudden realization, "So this is the real place." He widened his eyes and looked for a while, but he was disappointed. This is not as good as the illusion. Taoist Lu snorted and said, "The illusion of the mortal world can confuse one's mind. If you insist on it, then you are not a cultivator." Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve lightly. The two dragons knew what was going on and turned the carriage around, heading in the opposite direction. After traveling for a long time, the fog in front of them gradually dissipated. Finally, they could see the shape of the mountains clearly. The three people from Xianzhou Palace were stunned. There were three mountains in front of them, and no matter how they looked at them, they looked exactly the same. Zhang Yan said with his hands behind his back, "This barrier is called the Righteous Path Barrier. The entrance to the continent is in one of the mountains. The rest of the people are on the wrong path. If they go the wrong way, they will not be able to enter the continent." Taoist Lu thought for a while and said slowly, "Where my heart is, it is the righteous path." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, you are right." The dragon carriage did not change its path and went straight to one of the mountains in front of them. The two Jin brothers did not understand. Jin Zikang looked left and right and whispered, "Uncle, what is the coincidence of this barrier?" Taoist Lu said in a deep voice, "I can't explain it to you now. You only need to know that the place we are going to is the main gate." Zhang Yan smiled. These three doors could be fake, but they could also be real. However, those who passed through had to be absolutely convinced that what they were doing was right. Only then could they pass through. If there was even the slightest bit of doubt, they would be blocked outside. They naturally had a firm Taoist heart, but the two Jin brothers might not be so. That was why Taoist Lu did not say anything. Not long after, the carriage arrived in front of the mountain. At this moment, Zhang Yan spoke up to remind everyone, "The first two trials are easy. The third trial is the most difficult trial, the knocking the heart trial. Everyone is different, so everyone needs to be careful." The three of them were unconsciously worried. However, after a long time had passed, the two Jin brothers still did not feel anything. They were at a loss and did not know what to do. Only Taoist Lu was slightly better, but he only frowned, as if he was caught in a difficult problem. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. This method of invading people's hearts was silent. If one's cultivation was not high, he would not be able to sense the prohibition. But for people like him, it was as if something was imprinted into his heart from the void. He immediately knew the reason for this prohibition. The prohibition he needed was called the beheading prohibition. It was simple. If he wanted to reach the Donglai continent, he had to do one thing, which was to behead everyone around him. Otherwise, it would be difficult to pass. Chapter 9-10. When Zhang Yan sensed the intent of this Tao heart restriction, he couldn't help but raise his brows. Not to mention the fact that he was entrusted by Daoist Jin to bring the 3 people from Xianzhou Palace here. Even if they had a grudge against each other, if they really wanted to be ruthless, they would have to ask for the truth first. They wouldn't kill for no reason. But if he complied, it would go against his conscience. If he didn't, then it would be difficult to pass through this restriction. He thought about it carefully and already had a solution. He immediately sent a few telepathic messages and waved his sleeves, dispersing the mana. In an instant, the world spun. Zhang Chan, the 2 dragons, and Xianzhou Palace were all teleported away with this wave of his hand. He smiled. Since he had to behead the people around him to pass, then if there was no one around him, whose head would he behead? Daoist Lu felt his vision blur, and the scenery in front of him changed drastically. There were 4 tall mountains in front of him, like pillars, rising straight up. They didn't look like they were formed before, but like someone had buried them here with force. But after experiencing the previous 2 lights, he didn't find it strange that something strange had happened in Donglai continent. He looked to his left and right and saw his 2 nephews standing beside him. Just now, after hearing Zhang Yan's telepathic message, he knew that he had sent them away because of the Tao heart restriction, but he would have to go down by himself. He said, "The 2 of you, come with me." Jin Zikang looked at the mysterious land shrouded in celestial clouds, but he hesitated to go forward. He had cultivated for decades, but had never traveled outside. In reality, Xianzhou Palace didn't like it either. There were many monsters on the sea, and for a direct descendant like him, who would dare to let him go out as he pleased? After experiencing the initial excitement, a strong sense of homesickness rose within him at this moment. It was as if once he entered this continent, he would never be able to come out, and he would never see his parents and siblings again. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel afraid. He didn't go forward, but took a few steps back. Daoist Lu sensed something was wrong and asked, "What's wrong?" Jin Zikang stammered, "Uncle, I won't go. I won't be going. How about returning now?" Daoist Lu's face darkened. Just as he was about to scold him, he realized that his nephew might have been affected by the heart restriction. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian was just about to console Jin Zixiang when he saw the dumbfounded Jin Zixiang by the side. He asked, "Zixiang, how are you?" Jin Zixiang pointed forward and said with a trembling voice, "Martial uncle, look." Lu Daoist turned around and was dumbfounded. The clouds in front of them were gradually dissipating, and they saw that there was actually a towering mound on top of the 4 pillars. The mound was black in color and shaped like a round lid. It was completely bare, and no vegetation could be seen. However, when he looked up again, he saw a snake-like head poking out from the mound shell and disappearing into the clouds. How was this a Gaoyu? It was clearly a giant turtle. Less than an hour after the carriage entered the gate, a hut appeared in the clouds. The 2 Taoists who had followed Zhang Yan and the rest had also arrived. The scholar in white leaned to one side, protecting the treasured incense in his hand. He waited for the smoke to fly away and enter the clouds, disappearing in an instant. He looked down for a while and said excitedly, "Shixiang, I've searched, it should be here." The hemp-clothed Taoist was also excited. He couldn't help but stand up from the praying mat and take a few steps forward. After looking for a while, he frowned and said, "But I can't see anything clearly. Could it be that they purposely made up a mystery?" The white-robed scholar smiled and said, "Senior Marshal brother, you worry too much. We have already followed them for a year. If they wanted to make a move, they would have done it long ago. Senior Marshal brother, take a look." He used his finger to point around, such a huge cloud that covers at least 1,000 miles, but it actually appeared out of nowhere. There were no signs at all. Even if the person from the other continent is skilled, he probably can't do this, right? The hemp-clothed Taoist thought about it and felt that he was thinking too much. Alright, then let's quickly chase after them. Don't let Lu Qianyuan take the initiative. The white-robed scholar said firmly, "Of course not." He immediately chanted and the hut beneath his feet moved with mana. With a slight tremble, it turned into a ball of white smoke and carried the two of them into the gate. Once inside, the two of them saw Bright Moon's celestial mountain in front of them and were stunned. Although they didn't know what the Void Realm Gate was, to be able to roam freely above muddy ocean until now meant that they were truly skilled. In terms of cultivation, they were even higher than Taoist Lu, so they immediately felt that something was wrong. The white-robed scholar sneered and said, "Such an illusory scene, and you want to hide it from us?" The moment he thought about it, he immediately felt an inspiration. He turned the hut around and looked behind him. He laughed and said, "This is the right path." Not long after, they arrived at the righteous path gate again. They both sneered and passed through it without hesitation. However, after he leaped over the mountain, a profound feeling suddenly arose in the bottom of his heart, and he suddenly knew that he'd entered into a restriction formation. This restriction before him was called the solitary restriction, and if he wanted to enter the continent, then he had to kill his senior brother first. This feeling was extremely clear, as if it was engraved in his heart. He was instantly stunned. Although Senior Marshal brother and I aren't brothers, we have helped each other all these years. How can I do this? He subconsciously looked at the hemp-clothed Taoist, but he couldn't see the change in the other's expression. His heart couldn't help but shudder. I have this restriction in my heart. Senior Marshal brother's mana is higher than mine, so he might also have this restriction. I don't want to kill him, but what if he wants to kill me? When he thought of this, his body couldn't help but tighten. Cold sweat broke out on his back, and he secretly became vigilant. However, the more he walked forward, the more uneasy he felt. In the end, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of fierceness. He thought to himself, "Senior Marshal brother, this can't be blamed on me. The ancestral treasure has fallen into the hands of the Jin family. We outer branch disciples will never have a chance to rise again. Since only one of us can go, why don't you give this chance to me?" When this thought rose, he couldn't hold back anymore. He gathered all the mana in his body and suddenly opened his mouth. A white pill flew out and hit the hemp-clothed Taoist's back. The latter seemed to be defenseless. Without making a sound, he fell straight into the sea. His corpse rose and fell with the waves, and was swept away by a wave. There was no longer a trace of him. After Zhang Yan sent everyone around him away, the beheading restriction was naturally broken. The scenery in front of him changed again, and suddenly a straight sea path opened up. The mountains on both sides faced each other, as if the door was open to welcome guests. However, he didn't relax. Instead, his expression froze. Although the restriction from before was gone, there was actually another restriction now. This restriction was very troublesome for him, and it was called the mountain gazing restriction. Coincidentally, it was the trial that the senior from before had experienced. If one continued down this path, if he went down this path, he wouldn't know when it would end. Maybe it would be decades, or centuries, or even worse, when his lifespan is exhausted, he might not be able to go through. According to the records of the predecessors, as long as the restriction was broken, there would be no more obstacles. But now it seemed that wasn't the case. He closed his eyes and pondered. The problem should be the method to break the restriction just now. If he didn't break the restriction, then he would just cut off the path, or there wouldn't be any changes. There wouldn't be another restriction like this. Then there was only one possibility. The beheading restriction didn't want him to kill people, but emotions. Thinking back to the records of the predecessors, many things that he didn't understand before were now answered. He suddenly understood. The person who set up the restriction in Donglai continent. Maybe it was a senior who followed the path of emotionlessness. If one wasn't on the same path, it would be difficult to enter. No wonder there were many great virtues in the past. However, there were very few records about this place. As for those seniors who practiced the heartless path, they viewed others as nothing. If there were no clear benefits for their own families, they probably wouldn't leave a word or two behind. He snorted coldly. Donglai continent was not the land of just one family. If others could go there, he could go there too. What's more, he still had his master's orders. Now that he had eliminated 4 demons, he only needed 1 more to complete his mission. Duan Wu stopped at the last moment. After deciphering the corrosive runes. Gradually, he was able to comprehend the profundities of heaven and earth. The opportunity that he had been searching for seemed to be here. Since I can't enter immediately, I'll use a roundabout method. Just as he was about to act, he saw a figure approaching from afar. The figure bowed and greeted, "Old Master." Zhang Yan used his mana to take a look and saw that it was indeed Zhang Chan. He asked, "Why did you come back? Did you pass the test of your heart?" Zhang Chan scratched his head and said, "I don't think I sensed anything." Zhang Yan frowned slightly. Although Zhang Chan was the incarnation of a bug, it was natural that he had less desires compared to the desires of humans. However, it did not mean that he had broken free from the desires of a living being. Logically speaking, he should have been affected by the heart restriction and would not have escaped so easily. The test of the heart restriction should treat everyone equally, but Zhang Chan was not affected. There must be something strange about this. However, if he did not enter the continent, there was no point in thinking about it. Hence, he did not dwell on this matter and ordered Zhang Chan to retreat to the side. He sat in his own pagoda and circulated his energy for half a day. Then, a drop of demon blood was formed in his body. He forced the blood out from his fingertip and into the ashes of the furnace. After a short while, it turned into a green sprout. As if it had crossed 1,000 years in an instant, it suddenly grew taller. Then, the flower bloomed and the stalk fell. Finally, an elegant young man who looked similar to him emerged. From the records of the ancestors and just now, when he passed through the formation, he knew that the stronger the person's mana was, the stronger the defenses of the heart restriction against him. Because for a normal person, the mountains and rivers were already an insurmountable moat. Naturally, there was no need to use too much strength. However, this incarnation was like a newborn baby. His thoughts were like a piece of white paper and he did not have any mana. If he went in, no matter what, he would not be suppressed by the heart restriction. However, in order to understand the situation in the continent, he had to attach his spirit to it. Moreover, it could be blocked by the heart restriction. This was a dilemma. Hence, he made a small trick. He buried his soul and consciousness deep in his heart. Once there was an accident or a drastic change in his state of mind, his consciousness would come out and replace his body. However, he could not really not have a way to defend himself. Otherwise, a giant mountain bug could ruin his plan. He thought for a while and said, "That's good. Let's use this chance to see if this path is feasible." He took out the 9 absorption demon scroll and caressed it a few times. Then, he flicked his finger and it disappeared into the center of the clone's brows. Based on his original plan, he would create a clone in his own space and have it cultivate the 12 demonic images. Once it was successful, he would think of a way to get rid of the strand of consciousness and take it back for himself. Then, he would be able to obtain the body of the demonic image. Using a human to subdue a demon, and a human to become one with the demon. Since he had the chance, he might as well give it a try. Chapter 9:11. Zhang Yan looked at the clone a few more times before grabbing a handful of ashes. As the mana circulated, a Taoist robe and various scattered items were immediately refined. All of them had their own uses, especially this Taoist robe. Although it could not block supernatural powers and mana, it was not difficult to defend against normal weapons, water, and fire. However, this clone was formed from his blood essence. If it woke up and saw him, it might trigger a bit of the original consciousness in his body. To prevent the restriction from noticing, he left it at the same spot after doing all that. He waved his sleeves and controlled the pagoda to fly into the clouds. Not long after this avatar left Zhang Yan, it naturally attracted the attention of the Forbidden Formation. However, its heart was as clear as a mirror, and it passed through the Forbidden Formation in an instant. At that moment, its figure flashed, and it was pulled by an unknown force, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared from its original spot. Zhang Yan saw everything clearly from the sky. When he saw this, he squinted his eyes. Normally, the person who passed the restriction would enter the continent. However, this clone was sent in by the restriction as if it noticed that he was different from normal people. He immediately sensed that this formation was different from the usual dead formations that followed the rules. Perhaps it was a living formation that had developed consciousness. If that was the case, there might be more changes. However, once the clone was defeated, he would know immediately. Moreover, he had the demon subduing scroll, so he didn't have to worry. He sat down and closed his eyes to cultivate, waiting for his consciousness to be enlightened. After an unknown amount of time, the clone woke up from his muddle-headedness. He blinked and saw that he was sleeping on a big rock. He tried to stretch his arms and legs. He looked around carefully and thought that he was deep in the mountains. He muttered to himself, "I wonder where Master is." In his memory, his name was Zhang Ming. Since he was young, he had followed a person named Daoran to learn Tao in the mountains. This time, he followed him out to sea to search for a celestial mountain. Although he successfully found the mountain, he was disturbed by the restriction outside. He was swept into this foreign land by a strong wind, and the two of them were separated. Therefore, the first thought he had was to find his master. It was to find his master. He raised his head and looked. The sky was covered in haze, as if there was a thick layer of clouds covering it. The surrounding trees were tall and it looked eerie. However, it did not look like the celestial mountain that his master mentioned. He seemed to have thought of something. His heart skipped a beat. He reached into his robes and took out a talisman. It was the light body talisman. He remembered that his master made it personally and it could help him travel 1,000 miles in a day. However, when he chanted the incantation, he realized that there was no movement. He secretly raised his chi again and realized that the inner chi that he cultivated was also gone. It was as if he had never cultivated before. He could not help but touch his head and mumbled, "There's no spiritual vigor here at all. I can only give up on this talisman." He stood up and looked around. Not long after, he found a spacious place. He took out a flint knife and knocked it a few times. Not too long afterwards, he made a fire, and carefully lit the imperial edict. When it was completely burned, a cool breeze brushed his face, and his body seemed to be a bit lighter. He stretched his limbs and walked down the mountain. Although he did not know the way, he had an inspiration. He decided on a direction and walked. In less than an hour, he was out of the forest. The terrain in front of him gradually opened up and became flat. What made him even happier was that he saw a few broken stone tablets at the foot of the mountain. In front of him was a wide flat land without any weeds. He could tell that it was a road made of rammed earth. This meant that there were people here. He immediately got excited and walked in the direction of the road. As he walked, a day passed. However, the strange thing was that along the way, he did not see a single person. In the evening, he saw a village appear in front of him. He immediately became happy and quickened his pace. However, when he entered the village, he realized that there was not a single villager. It looked like the village was abandoned. He walked one round in the village. From the various traces, the people here should have left not long ago. It was at most 10 days. Moreover, they left in a hurry. He thought for a while and fetched some water from the well in front of the village to drink. Then, He continued on his way. Although his body could not use mana, it was after all built by Zhang Yan's blood. His body was strong and healthy, far better than a normal body. Along the way, although he did not eat a grain of rice and did not rest, he was still full of spirit and did not feel tired at all. After another night, he went over a hill and looked ahead. His eyes could not help but brighten up. Under the morning sun, he saw a long line of people heading north. He could not see the head or the tail, but it was sparse. There were men, women, old and young. Many people were leading cows and goats, urging geese and ducks. However, all of them looked worried. Some of them were walking in a daze, crying and cursing from time to time. They looked especially panicked and miserable. He quickly went down the hill and wanted to find someone to ask about the situation. However, everyone was rushing on with their journey, and not many paid attention to him. At this time, an old man suddenly walked over. Although his complexion was also not good, his beard and hair were very neat, not the slightest bit messy. Beside him was a rather good-looking young woman carrying a baby, and there was also a 7- or 8-year-old girl standing to the side. He walked forward and bowed. "May I ask, sir, where are you going?" The old man stopped and looked at him. He asked curiously, "Little Taoist, where did you come from?" Zhang Ming could not explain clearly. He pointed behind him and said vaguely, "From there." The old man looked and said thoughtfully, "Lan Xiao Mountain." "You live in the mountain. Could you be the disciple of Taoist Wang who lives on the mountain?" As soon as he said this, a skinny man suddenly came over and asked anxiously, "Taoist, are you one of those Taoists who know some celestial spells?" The old man said indifferently, "When I came here, I did say something about celestial spells. However, it was just a rumor spread by fools. I have seen that Taoist Wang before. He is just a sloppy Taoist who likes to drink. He is very ordinary." When the skinny man heard this, he immediately lost interest and walked away angrily. Zhang Ming waited for him to leave and asked again, "Sir, you are in a hurry." "This is," the old man sighed and said, "Sigh, the world is not peaceful. Demons and ghosts are everywhere. Little Taoist, you might not know this since you live in the mountain. The Xingrong city in the west was destroyed by King Guyang. I heard that 100,000 people were devoured. I had no choice but to seek refuge with my fellow villagers." Zhang Ming asked a few questions and found out that since 100 years ago, the world was in chaos. Demons and devils appeared everywhere and devoured humans. There was no longer any law in the imperial court. The generals of each province and county ruled over their own territories. It was a chaotic world. In the recent 10 years, the demon disaster became more and more severe. They would attack the prefectural cities at the slightest provocation. The world lost its population. As for the lone young great king, he was a greater demon that could flap his wings and soar into the sky, and he brought along a few hundreds and over 1,000 lesser demons. Everywhere he passed, neither man nor beast was spared. So when the commoners in the surroundings found out about this, how could they not be terrified? All of them abandoned their homes and fled. Zhang Ming listened and mumbled, "Master, is this the celestial mountain you were talking about?" The old man reminded him, "The demons and devils are here. It is not appropriate for little Taoists to hide in the mountains. You should go back and inform your master and leave this place." Zhang Ming said softly, "Little Taoist, my master is not by my side." The old man misunderstood his words and sighed, "The world is difficult. Deep in the mountains is not necessarily a paradise. My surname is Yu. If little Taoist doesn't mind, why don't you come with us? My son is working for Marquis Rong. He has some strength. With him around, there is no need to worry about evil people." Zhang Ming felt that he had nowhere to go. If he went with the crowd, he might be able to find his master. He thanked him and agreed. After walking with the crowd for a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. The crowd stopped beside a river. In twos and threes, they went to fetch water or a fire. However, no one dared to stray too far from the crowd. Zhang Ming's eyesight was good. He found a tree stump and invited Elder Yu to sit on it. He sat cross-legged on a thick piece of dead leaves and meditated according to the qi technique taught by his master. Although he could not feel any spiritual vigor and his inner qi became weak, he did not give up. Elder Yu saw that after walking for so long, there was not a speck of dust on him. He was very surprised and nodded his head. His eyes showed a look of anticipation. After a long time, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He opened his eyes and saw the little girl next to the old man holding a big bowl in front of him. She said, "Little brother, Auntie asked me to give this to you. Only after eating will you have the strength to continue on our journey." Zhang Ming saw that although his face was covered with mud, his eyes were big and lively. He looked innocent and gave people a good impression of him. He smiled and said, "Thank you." The little girl said, "My name is Jean. Where is my auntie?" She pointed and Zhang Ming looked over. When the beautiful woman saw him looking at her, she seemed to be shy and quickly lowered her head. He lowered his head to look at the bowl and saw that it was filled with something black. However, on the way to escape, it was already good enough to have something to eat. Therefore, not only did he not despise it, he even felt grateful. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and brought it to his mouth. He drank a few mouthfuls and found that it was a little astringent and bitter. He could not taste what it was, but it was warm and very warm. Jean waited for him to finish and took the bowl. She went to the river to wash. The weather was cold and the river was cold. Zhang Ming saw that his little hands were struggling to wash in the water. After a while, his hands turned red from the cold. He could not bear it and wanted to help. But Elder Yu stopped him and said seriously, "This is not what a young Taoist should do." Zhang Ming could only sit down. After meditating, he became more energetic. Just as he was thinking about where his master was, he suddenly heard someone playing a leaf flute. The melody was sad and melancholic. There was also someone crying, causing many people to wipe their tears. The two sides of the river were filled with a sorrowful atmosphere. Elder Yu listened for a while and sighed, "That's fourth brother Dang. I heard that he left the city early this morning to fetch his wife and son." When he passed by the city gates, he met with the fleeing crowd. Although he was fine, when he found his wife and son, they were no longer in shape. Ai. Zhang Ming felt sad when he heard this. Suddenly, there was a scream from afar, "Demon, the demon has caught up." In a split second, everyone's face was filled with fear and panic.